Hello! Let's see how we're doing. Restream, yeah, we're up and running. X, how we doing? I always get the wrong page when I go to X. I don't know why. There we go. There's X. All right. And Twitch, how we doing? Twitch is up and running. YouTube, how you doing? There's YouTube. And there's Pick. All right. We're up and running. Friday, January 17th. I'm in the pig, where I am. It's minus 14 degrees Celsius. And we are having a nasty blizzard. Well, last time I looked, we were. I know I've been getting emergency alerts on my phone advising against travel. And the city police asking people not to drive so that no plows get through. Yeah, crazy out there. Even got a warning from the hydro. I've never gotten a warning from hydros saying that winds are bad and people are losing power, which is kind of crazy. That never happens, but here we are. If I lose the stream, all of a sudden, well, you'll know what happened. I'll be sitting in the dark. Well, I guess I got my phone. Well, as long as that works. Look at our schedule. Today we're doing a recap that basically goes through the week's videos. So we'll be going back over master vulnerability versus population problem, PhD in men, 3 requirements, good relationship, and I think last Saturday's science was trying to think. And it was by Alex O'Connor, and it was the existential crisis, I think. And Sunday, I have to look. Oh, that was Sunday. Oh, right. The scientific one was the ad campaign and how that'll, what you think is really going on is not. Yeah. That's what we're going to be looking at tonight. And then we're going to be doing a little rocking out afterwards. Don't know how long we'll do that for, but, you know, a little bit. Have some fun. Do. Ooh, hey. Not yet. We're not there yet. Got 4 minutes until we start the shoot. Got my bottle of water, and I decided think I'm gonna take a few days off. Not from streaming, but just from, I'm gonna relax. You know, it's been a tough few months. Yeah. And then I'm gonna see what happens with Donald Trump on Monday. And then I'll give myself a week to calm down after that. And then I get some ideas. We'll see what we're gonna do. Three minutes. We'll get our shoe under weave. Alrighty, we got 3 minutes. Yay! Hey Alexa, what's minus 14 in Fahrenheit? Hey Alexa, what's minus 14 Celsius in Fahrenheit? 6.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Not super cold, but dang, really storming out there. Hopefully we don't lose power, I hope. Diddly-doom, biddly-doom. 5:58. Huh. We're in an ad break. Well, after the ad break, we'll start the show. All right. Whatever. We'll do that. Hey, 5:59. Ad breaks over in 43 seconds. All right, well, 19 seconds. Four, three, two, one. Supposed to be done. Let's do it. That's not me. That's me. Hello and welcome to the stream. My name's Menzer. This is the Tribe of Menzer. It's January 17th, 2025. 3 days to go before the inauguration of Donald Trump. Wow. Yeah. Well, all I can say, I will be watching how this impacts the lives of my grandchildren very closely. We'll see. The tonight we're gonna recap a bunch of the videos. The first one is about the ad campaign. Like the reason why showing this video is because it appears behind what people think is just the things they assume to be true. And the reality behind what they think is true actually was manipulated into them thinking it's true. So this is why we have this video, or why I'm showing it. It's to show how things that we take for granted really are really just manipulation by others. So that's what this video shows. So we'll get into it. And this video is by Today I Found Out. And we're just going to go through the first part, which is I think it's about 10, 20 minutes. The ad campaign that gave us breakfast as we know it. If you want, you can check out the whole thing there about baby carrots. It's by Today I Found Out. Very, very good channel. Here's a link to the video. And if you want to support them, I highly encourage you to do that. I'm humbled. I'm humbled to stand on the shoulders of great, and this is one of them right here. So I highly encourage you to go check them out. And I gave you the link, and let's make this big. If you have any questions, just shout out. We'll stop. We'll talk about them. Figure it out. Here we go. Otherwise, I'll just let it roll
Bacon, eggs,
and talk about it
and a tall glass
later.
Of orange juice. It's a breakfast as traditionally American as apple pie, and it's not hard to see why. After all, bacon and eggs are chock full of protein, while orange juice provides a healthy dose of vitamin C. Packing the calories and nutrients needed to fuel our busy lives, this combination has been a fixture of the American breakfast table for hundreds of years. Only it totally hasn't. While a few of us can imagine eating anything else in the morning, this staple breakfast as we know it is actually less than a century old, and far from being traditional, the combination of bacon, eggs, and orange juice is a deliberate product of a highly influential marketing campaign concocted by two of the greatest advertising minds of the 20th. Snays formed his own marketing agency, combining his wartime CPI experience with his Uncle Freud's theories to pioneer a new field that he dubbed public relations. One early campaign illustrates just how insightful and diabolical his approach could be. In 1928, George Washington Hill, CEO of the American Tobacco Company, came to Bernays with a problem: getting women to smoke. At the time, it was almost unheard of for women to light up, the act of smoking being strongly associated with masculine virility. This deeply entrenched cultural taboo was cutting American tobacco off from a large and potentially lucrative market. Bernays' unorthodox campaign proceeded in three phases. American Tobacco's research had revealed that women were put off by the green packaging of the company's Lucky Strike brand cigarettes, green being seen as a bit of an unfashionable color. After determining that the packaging was too expensive to change, Bernays decided instead to bring green back into vogue, organizing, among other events, a green gala at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel for some of society's most prominent trendsetters. Next, working off Lucky.
Okay. You're starting to see how this works. Right. Green puts them off, and changing the packaging too expensive. I know. Let's make green cool. Want some galas? It'll be great. Did it work? Well, check it out.
Lucky Strike's new slogan, "Reach for a lucky, not a sweet," he publicized a scientific study on the negative effects of sugar and distributed photos of slim models smoking cigarettes, firmly linking the habit with keeping the trim flapper physique popular at the time. While the campaign worked, it only succeeded in getting women to smoke at home. In order to break the taboo against women smoking in public, Bernays went after another subconscious female desire. In newspapers around the country, he announced at the upcoming 1929 Easter parade along Fifth Avenue, a group of 30 debutantes would light torches of freedom in support of women's liberation. When the day finally arrived, startled reporters looked on as the women confidently pulled out cigarettes and lit up. Almost overnight, smoking became associated with the modern, liberated woman, and sales of Lucky Strikes and other cigarette brands absolutely soared. The principle of
So, got a bunch of debutantes who light up torches of freedom and linked it to women's liberation. Yeah, interesting. Now that whole idea, the linkage mechanism works, starting to see a little behind the matrix. Okay. Look, dude, you might not remember me. What's up? I think I do. I may. I'm not streaming games anymore. We're going through some videos about essentially some things that are going on. Yes, way back in the day, that was a whole different life ago. How you doing? Yes. Still am, Grandpa. Actually, that's why I'm doing this now, is because grandkids. So in this video, this kind of reveals how things that are taken for granted really are not. They're actually manipulations. That's what this video is about. And there's tonight I'm reviewing the whole week's videos. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm thinking that what I'm going to try and do is put out factual or promote factual content. Yep. Yeah, factual research-based content. So that, helps everyone learn and kind of understand more about what's going on around them. Because I put together a video that kind of explains the start of it. I don't know if you'd be interested in seeing that. I haven't released it yet, because I have to pay for a subscription to Descript so I can actually get the video without the watermark. But I can play it. It has a watermark on it. But I'm seeing that people are more interested in gaming, but it's your choice to make. Yep. For sure. Diddly-doo. But this is where I guess the people that I think really need the most help are is I know for my grandkids are, so hey, that's who I'm interested in helping. So yeah. Yeah. So we'll see. Maybe we can help and maybe we can't. I don't know. We'll find out. So how are you doing? What have you been up to? You still playing Ark, I guess? Mm-hmm. Yeah, not a lot. Mm, cool. Yeah, I've been seeing that there's been some issues going on there with Ark. Oh, okay. Cool. What kind of new games have you been playing? I don't even know what's new. Mm, Oop, 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 oop. Trying to get my chat to work on my monitor. Ah, there it is. Terraria. I'm thinking. Oh, what's that name? There's a game that's a building game that Satisfactory is based off of, and I think Terraria is like that game. I can't think of the name of it. Like a 2D game. Cool. Yeah, that the game I'm thinking of was 2D as well. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Well, thank you for stopping in. Thanks you for saying hi. Looks like Minecraft. Oh, but 2D, right? Yeah. I think yeah. It seems to me I've either seen it or seen something about it. Probably. Yeah. Oops. That was weird. Why did I do that? But yeah, thank you for stopping by and saying hi. You're more than welcome. I'm gonna see if I'm gonna go through the video here or revealing what's behind the matrix. Ah, here we go.
Consumption as personal statements or political performance remains standard of the marketing toolkit to this very day. But Bernays' most influential and long-lived campaign ran a few years earlier. In 1922, he was approached by the Beechnut Packing Company, which over the past few decades, Beechnut had seen a steady decline in its sales of bacon and eggs. This was largely the result of sweeping changes in the American labor market. For hundreds of years, most Americans worked on farms, and to fuel this hard labor, they ate hearty breakfasts, including bacon and
All
eggs.
right.
With the coming
We'll
of
see you.
industrialization, however, many Americans moved to the city and took up less physically demanding work. At the same time, evangelists like John Harvey Kellogg began advocating a bland diet of cereals to ward off sinful impulses, while growing concerns over indigestion and keeping slim pushed people away from rich and fatty foods. By the 1920s, the typical American breakfast consisted of little more than a roll or piece of toast, oatmeal, a piece of fruit or glass of orange juice, and a cup of coffee. In order to reverse this trend, Bernays first contacted his agency's resident physician and asked him whether a light breakfast or a heavy breakfast would be better for overall health. As he later recalled, he agreed that a heavy breakfast was sounder from the standpoint of health than a light breakfast because the body loses energy during the night and it needs it during the day. We asked the physician, would he be willing, at no cost, to write to 5,000 physicians and ask them whether their judgment was the same as his. He said he would be glad to do it. We sent out a letter to over 5,000 physicians. Obviously, all of them concur that having a heavier breakfast was better for the health of the American people than a light breakfast. In August and September of that year, newspapers around the country trumpeted the verdict of some 4,500 physicians, the Chicago Tribune recommending brain workers and persons in sedentary occupations should eat a substantial breakfast of fruit, cereals, bacon, eggs, toast, or, as we of the South prefer, hot biscuits. While the Los Angeles Times breathlessly announced under the headline, "Enter the Big Breakfast," we were in dire peril of falling for the finicky French roll and chocolate, the Virginial English tea and marmalade, the slice of fruit and swallow of vermouth of the Mediterranean. Not so breakfasted the men who hewed a new civilization from the rocks of the western continent. Ham, eggs, bacon, cornmeal, buckwheat cakes, maple syrup, codfish balls, coffee in great mugs, hot biscuits, butter without stint or limit, hash, fried potatoes, apple pie, farm-made cream cheese, bowls of warm frothy milk. On the strength of such breakfasts as these, the young republic grew to world overlordship.
Okay. So this guy asked his doctor, so would you say it's better to have a big breakfast in the morning? And the doctor said, of course. You have to replace the nutrients that you've lost during sleep so that you can get up and have the energy to take on the day. Makes sense. But you see the difference of that game of telephone, right? So, yeah, that's where your truth kind of goes. Snap. Yeah. All right.
Okie dokie. The campaign was an instant success. Beechnut seeing sales of bacon and eggs climb back to pre-1900 levels. So successful, in fact, was Bernays at cementing in the American mind the association between bacon, eggs, and breakfast that to this day, 70% of bacon consumed in the United States is eaten at breakfast. Over his long career, Edward Bernays would mastermind countless such campaigns, using his mastery of human psychology to mold public opinion and carve out new markets for his clients. For example, in 1924, he threw an elaborate pancake breakfast at the White House in support of Calvin Coolidge's re-election campaign, creating a beloved political tradition that persists to this day. In the late 1940s, General Mills introduced its Betty Crocker brand instant cake mix, but sales were disappointing. Turning once again to psychoanalysis, Bernays deduced why. Housewives, he reasoned, were put off by instant mix because they themselves contributed very little to the baking process, making them feel lazy and like they were failing their husbands. To correct this, Bernays added a single instruction to the box: add an egg. This tiny contribution did the trick, and sales of Betty Crocker immediately picked up. In the 1950s,
Okay. You get that manipulation, right? Add an egg. Okay. Okay.
Bernays partnered with the American Dental Association to help the American Aluminum Company sell water fluoridation to the American people, while his campaign for Dixie Cup convinced people that regular drinking glasses were unsanitary, driving up sales of disposable cups. This guy is a genius.
Yeah, you seeing the manipulation? Right? Okay. Here we go.
Bernay's approach to marketing is perhaps best summed up by his biographer, Larry Tye. Hired to sell a product or service, he instead sold whole new ways of behaving, which appeared obscure but over time reaped huge rewards for his clients and redefined the very texture of American life. While his work has been widely criticized as underhanded, manipulative, and dangerous, it was reported that Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels had a copy of his book Crystallizing Public Opinion on his bookshelf. Bernays himself took a different view. We worked out the engineering of consent, which applies to any social goal, but the people who don't have social goals, unfortunately, can also employ it. Indeed, in his later years, Bernays would do extensive pro bono work for non-profit organizations such as the NAACP, American Cancer Society, including, ironically, on an anti-smoking campaign. Following a career spanning 7 decades, Edward Bernays died on March 9th, 1995, at the age of 104. But the story of the American breakfast doesn't quite end there. Remember how we said that the standard breakfast for the 1920s included a glass of orange juice? Well, just like bacon and eggs, there was nothing traditional about this breakfast staple either. In fact, up until the early 1910s, drinking orange juice was almost unheard of in America. This now ubiquitous daily habit had to be invented by the other American godfather of marketing, Alan Lasker. In 1908, the Southern California Fruit Growers Association partnered with Lasker's firm Lord & Thomas to find a way to sell more oranges to the American public. While orange production in California was booming, demand had plateaued, leading to an orange surplus that threatened to tank prices and destroy the industry. Lasker's first step was to rebrand the association, giving them the now familiar name of Sunkist. Increasing orange sales proved a trickier task, but in 1916, Lasker hit upon a solution. While the average American ate only half an orange at breakfast, a glass of orange juice took up 3 to 4 oranges to make. If Americans could be convinced to make their own orange juice, orange consumption would significantly increase. To this end, Lasker designed a simple home juice press and heavily promoted it in magazines like the Saturday Evening Post under the catchy slogan, "Drink an orange." These ads touted the health benefits of orange juice and even included a promotion whereby customers could collect and redeem orange wrappers and receive a free juicer. The campaign coincided perfectly with a health scare over vitamin deficiency and a condition called acidosis. Panic Sunkist was quick to exploit. A 1929 ad read, "Estelle seemed to lack vitality, didn't even make an effort to be entertaining, hence she did not attract the men. Acidosis is the word on almost every modern physician's tongue." In 1934, scientists discovered that acidosis was actually a rare disease unaffected by drinking orange juice, but by then the damage was done. Almost overnight, orange consumption shot up nearly 400%, almost single-handedly saving the US orange industry and securing orange juice's coveted spot at the American breakfast table. The campaign also cemented in the minds of the American public the notion that orange juice is a uniquely healthy drink, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. In fact, the average glass of orange juice contains a whopping 27 grams of sugar, about as much as a can of Coca-Cola. When an orange is eaten, the pulp, being difficult to digest, causes this sugar to be absorbed much slower throughout the day. The sugar in orange juice, by contrast, is absorbed more or less all at once, meaning that overconsumption of orange and other commercial fruit juices carries the same obesity and diabetes risk as drinking sugary sodas. And while ads for orange juice promote it as natural and fresh, the modern product found on store shelves is actually anything but. Raw orange juice is often stored for up to a year before reaching the consumer, and the pasteurization process used to render it safe also strips it of most of its natural flavors and aromas. Orange juice producers must thus use flavor packs, specifically formulated blends of processed orange oils and other aromatic compounds to reintroduce these flavors to the juice before packaging and selling it. The upshot of all of this is just how intentionally planned many of our most common habits really are. No matter how traditional it might appear, if you regularly consume some specific food, drink, or other product, there's a good chance that that's because some marketing executive somewhere absolutely wanted you to. And as a corollary, as we've covered in great detail on the origins of most major holidays, pretty much every holiday that enjoys massive popularity usually has that popularity thanks to one or more advertising campaigns that propelled it into the big leagues of holidays and other campaigns that keep it there. Holidays that aren't easily commercialized rarely see the same heights of popularity as those that are. So next time you're lamenting over the over-commercialization of some of the most beloved holidays, remember that the holiday probably wouldn't even be there if it hadn't been massively commercialized.
All right. And if you want to see where do baby carrots come from, you can check out that video. Yes, I hope that has shown you how different ways of linking ideas can be used to change how you think about things by just linking ideas that may have nothing to do with anything. So that's kind of what that video shows. Our next video will... It's definitely a deeper video than it was the religious or spiritual truth, and it's into existential crisis and what that kind of means. And yeah, so we'll take a look at that, which is right here. We'll go there. And this is the Existential Crisis Iceberg by Alex O'Connor. And it's a really, I would definitely suggest going and checking out his content and support him. Awesome content creator. Again, standing on the shoulders of giants. Connor, there you go. Sure you can see that. All right, let's go through this. If you have any questions, comments, we can talk about it. Yeah, here we go.
I'm on TikTok, and not long ago on that app, I came across the so-called Existential Crisis Iceberg. Now, as far as I can tell, this was originally posted on Reddit by a user called Cosvic into r/iceberg charts. I don't know if they made it, they were just reposting it, but the version on TikTok has over 5 million views and 500,000 likes. So it's obviously captured some people's imagination, and I thought we could take a look. We start at the top of the iceberg with everyone has their own complex life. This doesn't seem like an entirely radical realization, but it's a common enough revelation that it has a name. They call it Sonder, which is defined by one website as the profound feeling of realizing that everyone, including strangers passing in the street, has a life as complex as one's own, which they are constantly living despite one's personal lack of awareness of it. Like I say, this isn't super revolutionary on the surface. Everybody knows that you're not the only character in this play, but we do almost always feel like the main character, and we kind of forget that to everybody else, even to our closest friends, we are just accessories to their life. We're side characters to their play. It's quite profound when you really sit with it for a while and realize that this world is just brimming with conscious experience, most of which you'll never even know about, let alone get to engage with, much less experience. Next, worry about future. Again, very straightforward. You start to realize that there are things in life that matter. When you grow out of your childhood, you realize that you can't spend all day long just thinking about your next meal or who you're going to play with at lunchtime. No, you've got to think about things like taxes and owning a house and all of that kind of fun stuff. And it's clear to see how this can lead to an existential crisis, especially when this goes wrong. Doesn't really require much more explanation, so I think we'll just move on. Okay, so now we're on the next level, on the tip of the iceberg. Simulation theory. You'll almost certainly have heard of this. It's the idea that we could all just be living in a simulation. This is something of a modern take on René Descartes' evil demon hypothesis. And Descartes' way of entertaining this idea is to imagine that there's an evil demon who's constantly deceiving us into thinking that the world around us exists in the way that it does, but in fact it doesn't, and we're all just being deceived all the time. A modern take on this is the idea that we're living in a simulation. You think that you're in a real world with real people and real objects, but actually you're in a computer simulation and your brain is just being prodded electronically to produce fake experiences. And this is broadly known as radical skepticism. If it can be questioned, then we should question it, and we begin to realize that we basically have no justification even for some of our most foundational beliefs, like the existence of the external world. And just thinking that this is possible is enough to send some people into an existential crisis, but enter Nick Bostrom, who popularized what's known as the simulation argument. Not just the idea that we could be living in a simulation, but the argument that we probably are. Bostrom does this by saying that humanity will inevitably be able to simulate human experience. If you look at technological progress, things like AI, it will be no time before we're able to comprehensively simulate entire worlds on our computers. But, says Bostrom, if these are true simulations of the world, then that world in the simulation will itself develop the ability to simulate worlds. And the world that they simulate, if a proper simulation, will itself be able to simulate worlds. And they'll be able to simulate worlds, and they'll be able to simulate worlds, and so on. So you have this sort of chain of simulated worlds, all beginning with the first world, which is the only one that's actually real and not simulated. And Bostrom says, what's more likely? That we happen to be in the very first real world, or that we're in one of the potentially billions or trillions of simulated realities? Just on sheer probability, we should think we're almost certainly in a simulation. For what it's worth, I'm not super convinced by this, mostly because I'm suspicious that we will ever be able to simulate human consciousness. That's a big topic, and perhaps one for another video, but I have had Nick Bostrom on my podcast, and we did talk about AI consciousness. I also have a whole video explaining the meaning of the evil demon and Descartes' famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am," all available in the description below. Next, why does anything exist? This is one of the most naive philosophical questions that anybody can ask. It's one of the first questions that anybody can ask, and one of the most profound. Why is there stuff? If you consider the possibility that there could have been nothing, it seems like there could have just never existed anything ever, and yet there's stuff. There are chairs, and there are trees, and there are minds, and there are colors, and there are all kinds of weird things. I mean, there may even be things called morals if you're a moral objectivist. There are all kinds of weird things that exist, either materially or immaterially. None of that had to be. And this can cause an existential crisis, I think, in two ways. Because when you start trying to answer this question, you might say, well, I guess it just exists for no reason and we'll never know, which is quite existentially troubling. But if you determine that there is some answer as to why anything exists, there's some reason that you've discovered, maybe it's because God created the world and designed it in this way, then you've introduced something like purpose, and purpose that's externally put upon you. And now you have this teleology in your life, whether you like it or not. So when you really reflect on the fact that there could have been nothing, but there is stuff, you're either going to be left with this really uncomfortable agnosticism about why you're here in the first place, or possibly land on an answer which might just revolutionize your entire life. Acknowledgement of death. Okay, this one's pretty straightforward. When you realize that you're going to die for the first time, it can be a little bit scary. Most people know they're going to die. Some people think they might be able to escape it. We'll see how that goes for them. But most people think that they are mortal. Fine, but when was the last time you really acknowledged it? I don't mean just accepted that it's true. I mean sat down for 20 minutes and thought about nothing other than your own mortality and really tried to comprehend what it means that one day you will not exist. I did this once when I was a teenager, and I don't think I've ever done it since, partly because it scared the absolute living shit out of me. These days I'm a little more agnostic about the nature of mind and the existence of God and the afterlife, and so I suppose that provides me with some comfort, but I must say that when it comes to existential crises, it doesn't get much more straightforward than realizing that your time is limited on this planet. Having said that, some people do think that the shortness of life is what gives it its meaning. They say that if life were infinitely long, then every day would be meaningless. It's like having infinite money in your bank account. What's $1 to you? It's meaningless. It has no value, essentially. Whereas if you've only got $100 in your bank account, then $1 can be quite a lot of money to you. So the acknowledgement of death may lead to an existential crisis, but it may also lead to a recognition of the very thing that gives life meaning in the first place. Okay, we're moving down a level. Sympathy is created by self-pity. I'll admit that I don't actually know exactly what this is getting at. I suspect it's something like the idea that our care for other people is actually only a derivative of our care for ourselves. Is it just some evolutionary wiring? And if it is evolutionary wiring, then why would it evolve? Surely evolution favors what will help me to survive, so why would I evolve a capacity for caring about other people? Oh, well, it must be that in some way caring about other people is good for me. That might be a true evolutionary account of how morality evolved, but it's not a very wholesome one, especially when you consider your love and care for your friends and realize that that might just be some kind of evolutionary trick. But like I say, I don't know if that's what this is actually getting at. It's just my best guess. Last Thursdayism. What on earth is that? Well, put simply, it is the supposition that the entire universe and everything in it was created last Thursday. That's it. Why would anyone believe this? Well, as far as I can tell, nobody actually does. It's more like a thought experiment, which is why maybe it doesn't belong on the existentialist iceberg. The idea is that you can't disprove that the universe was created last Thursday. It might have been, and all of your memories might just be an illusion that were created at the same time. So, okay, nobody really believes this, but why does the thought experiment exist? It generally comes up in two contexts. The first is this radical skepticism again, the idea that we can't justify some of even our most basic, fundamental philosophical beliefs. The second context is specifically young Earth creationism. This is a branch of Christianity that believes the universe is about 6,000 years old. Now, one of the great mysteries for the young Earth creationist is the existence of really old stuff. Like, really old stuff. Millions of years old type stuff. Things like mountains or fossils. These are much older than 6,000 years old, so how does the young Earth creationist account for them? Well, enter the so-called omphalos hypothesis, the idea that God created the world 6,000 years ago, but with the appearance of old age. Why would he do this? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but some suggestions include the functionality of the world. It needs things like mountains, and so God created them, looking really old. But also, it could be a religious test. God knew that one day humanity would evolve secular science, and it would start telling us evil things like the Earth is older than 6,000 years old. So God put these things here to test us, to make sure that we'll stay faithful, even in the face of opposite evidence. Whatever the reason for people believing in this apparent age hypothesis, Last Thursdayism is kind of a parody of this to show how ridiculous it sounds and how ridiculous it is. Therefore, I think it could be existential crisis inducing in the context of radical skepticism, but no more than something like the simulation theory, so I don't really know why it's this low down. If you want a healthy brain, you need a healthy diet. And that is where today's sponsor, AG1, can help. AG1 is a daily health drink, a blend of over 70 vitamins, minerals, and...
the thing, please go to the link and check that out. Give him the support he deserves. I just don't have the thing on in my settings.
Where do you exist? You're probably kind of the same thing as your brain. You are your brain, in effect. But where's your brain? Well, it's kind of locked away inside of your skull, just sitting there in the dark. I mean, we have sense data, we have our eyes to see and our ears to hear, but that's just going through nerves and being translated by our brain. It's essentially an illusion. I mean, your eyes actually see things upside down and your brain flips it over again. And you don't directly engage with sound. A vibration hits your eardrum and sends a signal down a nerve which gets translated by your brain into an experience. But when you think about it, you're actually quite disconnected from it all. You're sort of like a person locked in a control room. You've got a big monitor and there are cameras outside so you can see the world, and there are speakers and microphones so you can hear everything that's going on too, but you're locked in that room and there's no way for you to get out. And if one day the monitor turned off and the microphone stopped working, you would just be sat there alone in the dark. And I suppose the scary thing is you are in that situation right now. It's just that the monitor is switched on and the microphones are still working, at least for now. We are not alone. It would be pretty scary if there were aliens out there, not least because they might attack us for literally any reason, but also because it should revolutionize our view of life. Firstly, for the religious, the idea that humans are special and that God created the universe with us in mind would be shattered in an instant. But also all kinds of philosophy about humanity and what it means to be a conscious agent as opposed to other animals would be radically altered by alien life. But for someone like me, I don't know if this is super existential, I might have put it a bit higher on the list. Afterlife skepticism. If you believe in God and you believe in the afterlife, then you are pretty consoled throughout most of your life that although your friends are dying, you're going to see them again. And although you're going to die one day, you don't need to worry because you're going to be somewhere better and you're going to be with all your friends again. But then you start questioning it. Does it really exist, or is it just a fantasy we've come up with for the purposes of consoling ourselves? That can definitely give you some existential dread, especially if it's the first time you've encountered the idea. However, many people get along just fine not knowing. I suppose if you knew that there were no afterlife and your skepticism went all the way in that regard, then this would be pretty existential, but we've already done the acknowledgement of death thing, so I don't know why this would be lower down on the iceberg. Okay, we submerge to the next level and we start with nihilism. Nihilism is sort of the crown jewel of existentialism. In many ways, it's the result of an existential crisis rather than the cause of one. When you start questioning these things, is there an afterlife? Maybe not. Oh, I'm definitely going to die one day. Oh, I don't know why I'm here. The result of this is to think, nothing matters. And even if something does matter, I have absolutely no way to work out what it is, and I've tried, but I can't get there, so I'm just going to give up all hope in that project. So nihilism is broadly the view that nothing matters, that there are no objective values. There are sort of different kinds of nihilism. You can be an epistemological nihilist, or just a moral nihilist, or like a broad nihilist about everything. But I think this all-encompassing, nothing matters in any context, is what people tend to think of when they think of a nihilist. I understand why it's here, but like I say, the other things on this list cause existential crises. This seems to me more the result of one. We are alone. A controversial choice, putting it below we are not alone. There's that famous quote by Arthur C. Clarke: two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe, or we are not. Both are equally terrifying. The author of this chart has decided that they're not equally terrifying, and us being alone is more scary than us not being alone. I don't know about this. Let me know what you think in the comments. If we are alone in the universe, then we're forced to contend with this image of us sort of being on this rock, floating around in cold space, and it does all feel a bit scary and isolated. But I will also say that if in this entire incredible universe there's only one place where life evolved, I think that counts as some evidence towards theism. I mean, if life just evolves spontaneously, we rightfully ask the question, as Fermi famously did, where is everyone? If life can just spontaneously evolve on planets, then given the abundance of life-permitting planets in the universe, where are they? However, if the entire universe was created with the express intention of permitting human life on planet Earth, that mystery sort of disappears. It's of course replaced with the mystery of why the universe would need to be so big in the first place, but I've discussed this in depth with my friend Joe Foley from Unsolicited Advice, and that was in a podcast titled 7 Questions Atheists Cannot Answer. But I don't know, what do you think? What would be more scary, us being alone or us not being alone? Okay, next, being...
That's a really interesting question. What is more scary? Us being alone or not alone? The implication of either are pretty staggering, you know? I don't know if you're still there, just chilling, or if you're watching or not. But yeah, we are not alone. Or we are all alone. That's a very, very chilling question. I'm going to write it down. Might explore that further. All right. We'll carry on.
Born before immortality. I think this is getting at the idea that as science advances, many people believe we might one day be able to overcome death itself. And this day being, of course, in the future, and maybe the near future, we might well be living in the last mortal age. So it kind of feels a little bit unfair that maybe our grandchildren will get to live forever, but we, just because we happen to be born before the scientific developments that made it possible, will not get to live forever. There are a few problems with this, if you ask me. One is that I'm not sure if science will one day overcome death, but when it comes to immortality, materially speaking, I just don't think this is possible. Even if we develop the technology to avoid death on planet Earth, one day the sun is going to eat the Earth, and maybe if we've escaped the Earth by then, that planet will one day die, and wherever we've spread to, that planet will one day die too, and eventually the universe is going to come to some kind of end, whether it be a big freeze or a heat death or whatever. It's not the kind of environment in which I think conscious experience and materially existing human beings even can obtain. But also, even if that were possible, would you want to live immortally in this heat death or big freeze universe? It doesn't sound super attractive to me, and so the idea that I'm born before immortality is actually pretty consoling. Deeper we plunge. Dual consciousness theory. Okay, this is a fun one. Dual consciousness theory is, broadly speaking, the idea that two consciousnesses can exist in one brain. How can this happen? Well, one way is as the result of a surgery called a corpus callosotomy. Your brain, as you probably know, is split into two hemispheres, and these hemispheres are connected by a group of fibers called the corpus callosum, and this allows, as well as impedes, communication between your two hemispheres. A corpus callosotomy is the severing or partial severing of the corpus callosum, and this is most commonly done as a treatment for extreme cases of epilepsy. When the corpus callosum is severed, communication between between the two hemispheres is disrupted. Now, they can still communicate to a limited degree through other means, but we do sometimes begin to see some weird things happening. In 1908, it was reported that there was a woman whose left hand would sometimes attack her. Her left hand would grab her throat and try to strangle her and require her to use her right hand and the rest of her body to fight it off. Since then, there have been many documented cases of this so-called alien hand syndrome, where somebody's limb can do something completely contrary to their will and seem to have a mind of its own. This isn't always dangerous, but it can result in people, for instance, pouring out a cup of coffee on the floor that they've just brewed. Or in some cases, one hand might be trying to put on clothes to start the day, whereas the other hand then goes to take them off because it wants to stay in bed or something. This is an extremely interesting, but of course also horrifying condition for a person to live with, and it's best documented in cases where somebody has undergone a corpus callosotomy. Now, you may know that the right hemisphere of your brain broadly controls your left arm, and the left hemisphere of your brain broadly controls your right arm. And so if the hemispheres aren't communicating with each other, it might make sense that your arms would start wanting to do different things. And this is seen by some as supportive evidence that, at least in cases of split brain patients, like those who've undergone a corpus callosotomy, that there are two consciousnesses sort of in battle with each other in this one human brain. I recorded a podcast earlier this year with Ian McGilchrist, author of The Master and His Emissary, which is about the two hemispheres of the brain and how they kind of do different things and have different ways of approaching the world. So even if it might be most obvious in split brain patients, it might still be the case that there are two consciousnesses within you. You just don't notice it as much because your corpus callosum is allowing them to communicate with each other and work in harmony. And this got me thinking about those split brain patients. If you have alien hand syndrome and your left hand is trying to do something and you have no idea what it's doing and can't control it, if this is the result of two consciousnesses, then you're only aware of the one that doesn't want the hand to be moving. So where is the consciousness that does want to move the hand? Is it sort of trapped somewhere without any ability to speak or communicate? The split brain patients have this consciousness within them that's controlling that alien hand, but it can't get out through the mouth or any other means of communication. Is that alien hand trying to tell us something? I don't want to think about it. Observation creates the universe. Okay, it's generally thought that the material world around us exists whether we're here to observe it or not. But some people think that the universe only exists because of our observation, or because of our minds sort of creating it. I suppose the person to reference here is George Berkeley and his philosophy of idealism. This is the view that there are no material objects, there's no material world. The only thing that exists are ideas in people's minds. I don't have the time or the expertise to go into George Berkeley's philosophy in depth here, but the basic idea is that the universe is kind of created by the mind, or is an idea or set of ideas within the mind. And the idea that the universe is created by observation suffers from a similar objection to George Berkeley's worldview. That objection is this: if the universe only exists because it's being observed, suppose I light a candle and then I leave the room. An hour later, I come back into the room and the candle has melted. But if the universe only exists insofar as it's being observed, how is this possible? If the candle only exists if it's being observed, then when I left the room, it should have ceased to exist. And when I came back, it might have started to exist again, but it should be in the same state that I left it. It has to have existed in the meantime in order to have melted. But how does it exist if the universe is created by observation? In the context of George Berkeley, he had a very straightforward answer to this. Well, the candle is still being observed when you leave the room, just not by you. It's being observed by someone else. Can you guess who? So George Berkeley's idealism is, at least in his view, a novel proof for the existence of God. God is the ultimate observer who creates the universe. Now, I think that if you believe the universe is created by observation, then you do suffer from this objection a little bit, and maybe are led into the hands of this argument for God's existence. So in the context of the existential crisis iceberg, well, this might be something that doesn't cause an existential crisis. It might actually solve one, because it leads you right into the hands of an argument for the existence of God. Mystery of consciousness. Well, consciousness is the most mysterious and yet familiar thing in the world. We know absolutely nothing about it, and yet we cannot perceive anything except through it. I've spoken about this a lot, so I won't go into detail here, but that's kind of the existential part, the idea that this fundamental thing about our experience, the very window through which we perceive the world or are able to think at all, is something so foreign to us that we don't even understand the mechanism by which it works. Not only that, but we don't even seem close to coming up with a solution to the mystery of consciousness. So the thing that's most fundamental to our experience as sentient human beings is a complete and utter and impenetrable mystery to us. How fun. Okay, next level, deeper we plunge. Past and future exist simultaneously. The most common view of time is the so-called A theory of time. A theory states that the present is all that exists. Time genuinely flows, the past is no more, and the future is yet to be. But there's also the B theory of time. This suggests that past, future, and present all exist on something like a time block, and that we're sort of perceiving one part of the time block, and that's what we call the present. On this view, things like objects or people don't have 3 dimensions, they have 4 dimensions. They actually have 4 dimensions right now. They have a dimension left to right, forward to back, up to down, but also past to future. So the past version of you from 5 minutes ago is as much a part of you now as the left-hand side of your body is. Likewise, future you is a part of you. It's a bit like if I could only see my left hand and my right hand was behind my back. I can't see it, but it's still very much there. This will have all kinds of implications. For example, free will. If your future self kind of already exists, can you really have any choice in what it does? But also it gives us reason to doubt our intuitions, because intuitively we do travel through time. Intuitively, the past doesn't exist anymore. But if the B theory of time is correct, we have to abandon that intuition, which tells us that the way that we initially view the world is often philosophically completely and utterly wrong. Now, I find this interesting, but not particularly existential, at least not compared to the other stuff we've been talking about, so I'm a bit surprised to find it this low down, but maybe I've just misunderstood what the author is getting at. And if the author is watching this video, then, well, let me know. Okay, everybody's heard of determinism, right? Well, get ready for superdeterminism. What is superdeterminism? Well, normal store-bought determinism is the view that everything happens in accordance with a determined chain of events. If you could know the direction and speed of every atom in the universe, then in principle you could predict everything that's going to happen in the future with 100% accuracy. It's a little bit like how when you flip a coin, it feels random, but if you actually knew all of the physical conditions of the coin, you could predict with 100% accuracy whether it would be heads or tails. Determinism says that the whole universe works in this way. Things seem to be subject to chance, but actually they're not at all. Now, you may have noticed that any time you ever bring up this subject ever to anybody, the very first thing they say is, what about quantum physics? Everybody's heard that quantum physics involves some element of randomness, that electrons don't actually exist in one place or another, but there's some kind of wave of probability, and that there's actually a lot of chance going on at the most micro level of our universe. Well, sure, yeah, maybe. No one knows for certain what's going on down there. But there is this view called superdeterminism, which, as far as I understand, is sort of like determinism, but applied to quantum physics. I'm not a physicist, so I'm kind of the wrong person to ask, but as far as I understand, superdeterminism allows us to do things like retain the actual reality of particles rather than having these quantum probability clouds. If you want to learn more, there are some great YouTube videos on the subject, including by people like Sabine Hossenfelder or Arvin Ash. Those two, I think, actually have differing views on the matter, so maybe worth checking both of them out, although I'm not sure because, again, I don't fully understand all of this stuff. But basically, I think that what's going on with superdeterminism is the removal of randomness even at the quantum level. Why would this cause an existential crisis? Maybe because of free will. If somebody believes in free will, the idea that the universe is determined can be a big problem for their worldview. I mean, if the way everything is going to go is completely determined from the Big Bang, then you can't really be said to be in control of the future of your own actions. So a lot of people take refuge in the idea that, no, there is some randomness in the universe, it's not all determined. I think this is totally misguided. I'm just going to be blunt here, because randomness is something which, by definition, you're not in control of either. If something happens truly randomly, it's part of the definition of random that you didn't have some determinate cause in making it occur. Now, in my experience, when I've argued that free will doesn't exist, people often do bring up quantum randomness as a kind of retort. So I understand why superdeterminism would cause an existential crisis for these people, but to be honest, the existential crisis should have been there anyway, because of course, even if there is randomness in the universe, you're not in control of it. Human life is a momentarily universal anomaly. I think that's supposed to say a momentary universal anomaly. That is to say that in the course of the universe, something like human life or conscious existence is an anomaly. It's a sort of accidental flash that will come and it will go, and the universe will go on mindlessly for the rest of eternity. It's a bit like that clip from True Detective where Matthew McConaughey's character, Rust, I think his name is, I haven't seen the show, is in a car talking about how human consciousness is some kind of cosmic accident and he's being all nihilistic about it. I think that's kind of the thought that's supposed to be captured here. And obviously, if we are just some kind of cosmic accident, that's not the most existentially fulfilling revelation in the world, so I can understand why it would be on this list. But again, maybe I've misunderstood what it's getting at. Going deeper now, we are underneath the iceberg. The brain creates the flow of time. To be honest, I find this difficult to separate from the previous idea of the past and future existing simultaneously, because if the past and the future exist simultaneously, then where does time come from? It's got to be an illusion of the mind, so I think it's kind of similar to that. Boltzmann brain. Oh boy. One way to think about a Boltzmann brain is to consider that over an infinite amount of time, extremely unlikely things are guaranteed to happen. If the universe existed for an infinite amount of time, and there were just atoms floating around everywhere, then given that it's infinite, these atoms would form spontaneous structures and then dissolve, and every structure that you could possibly think of that can be made of atoms would at some point exist. The second law of thermodynamics says that entropy will always increase over time, and entropy is the amount of order or lack of order in a system. In practice, this means that if I spray an aerosol can over on this side of the room, particles will be released and they'll be on this side of the room. But given enough time, they'll spread across the room and eventually they'll be spread evenly across the room. Why does this happen? Well, because atoms are randomly vibrating in different directions, and given enough time, they just happen probabilistically to spread out evenly. But we are just talking about probability here. It's not impossible, in principle, for all of those particles that came from that aerosol can that are spread across the room to just spontaneously come together and jump into a water bottle sat on a table over there. It's just so unimaginably unlikely that we can basically treat it as a law that that's never going to happen. But suppose you had an infinitely existing universe. When you have an infinite amount of time, unlikely events aren't just probably going to happen, they're definitely going to happen. It's a bit like the monkeys on the typewriters. Given enough time, they'll produce the works of Shakespeare. It's not clear that would actually happen in that example, but you get the point. Randomness over an infinite amount of time is such that even the most extremely unlikely events will happen. In fact, they'll happen over and over and over again, because we're talking about an infinite amount of time here. So the realization that Boltzmann, of Boltzmann brain fame, had was that in this infinite universe where everything that could be made of atoms is made, sometimes brains will spontaneously form. Brains are just made of atoms after all, and everything does get made. And what's more, brains can spontaneously exist with a bunch of false memories. A little bit like the simulation or last Thursdayism, the idea that brains can have fake memories of the past. Well, sure, I mean, memories are just brain activity, and that's just made of atoms. So there will be brains that spontaneously exist with a bunch of false perceptions and false memories as a matter of certainty in an infinite universe of atoms bumping around with each other. And given the fact that these spontaneously existing brains with fake memories are going to happen much more commonly than actual brains evolved in the traditional way, requiring the evolution of galaxies and stars and planets and simple life and the evolution into human life and the evolution of consciousness and all of this kind of stuff, right? If you want to create a real brain with real memories, all of that needs to happen, and that's got a much lower state of entropy than just the brain spontaneously coming into existence. Now, of course, that less likely state of affairs will still happen. Remember, everything happens in an infinite amount of time, but it will just happen much less. So in this infinite universe of atoms bumping into each other, there will be far more of these brains, which are known now as Boltzmann brains, than there would be real brains with real experiences. And just like with the simulation argument, we have to ask, what's more likely? That you're one of these real brains with real memories, or that you're one of these much more common Boltzmann brains? And if you are a Boltzmann brain, what does that mean? It means that you, right now, are just a spontaneous arrangement of atoms in an infinite universe that at any moment is about to disassemble and you will exist no more. So ultimately, this is another kind of radical skepticism. It's a little bit more sort of sciencey, so it seems to have a bit more weight behind it, but you'll have noticed that this relies heavily on the idea that there is an infinite past of atoms bumping into each other according to the same laws of thermodynamics that exist in our universe, which appears to be a finite universe which started 13.8 billion years ago. Of course, maybe our universe is just one of many. Maybe something came before the Big Bang and maybe it stretches infinitely back into the past, but there's no reason to think that atoms would vibrate and move in the same way. So I think that the philosophical and scientific evidence that the universe is not in fact infinite is enough to do away with this hypothesis. But again, I am no expert on science. I am just a lowly YouTuber, so if I have got this horribly wrong, please go easy on me in the comments. Okay, now we're at the bottom. We're at the depths of the depths, and we're dealing with quantum immortality. There is an interpretation of quantum mechanics put forward by Hugh Everett called the many worlds interpretation. This suggests that when quantum events occur, every possible outcome actually happens, and that the universe kind of splits into different realities, each of which plays out a different possible outcome. Again, I have a full podcast episode on this topic, this time with David Deutsch, a fervent believer in the quantum multiverse. If you're interested, a link is down below. But take, for example, Schrödinger's cat. A quantum event determines whether a cat will die or live, and until you open the box, the cat is both dead and alive at the same time. The many worlds interpretation says that there are simply two branching realities, one in which the cat lives and one in which the cat dies, but they both actually happen. They're just different branches of reality that then just continue on independently of each other. So now we can consider a slightly dark thought experiment known as quantum suicide. Imagine the Schrödinger's cat setup, but instead of the cat, it's you. There's a button that you can press which, through the same quantum mechanism, has a 50% chance of killing you and a 50% chance of letting you live. You press the button and you're still alive. Okay, lucky you. You press the button again. You're still alive. You press the button again and again and again and again and again. Is this thing on? You're still alive. Either the machine must be broken or you have beaten incredible odds. I mean, every single time you press that button, the likelihood of your survival decreases to vanishingly small proportions. So suppose you press the button 100 times, 1,000 times, 500,000 times, and you're still alive. What would that tell us? Well, some people suggest it would tell us that the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is true. If other interpretations are correct, and there's a probability of outcomes, and by pressing the button you realize one of them, it shouldn't take very long for you to die. Whereas if it's the case that every single possible outcome does happen in some reality, then consider this. Every time you press the button, two branches of reality are created, one in which you live and one in which you die. Now, which one of those branches does your conscious experience go down? That is, from your perspective, which of those branches do you end up in? Well, it kind of has to go down the one in which you remain alive. It can't go down the one in which you die because you're dead. There's no you for that conscious experience to continue in. Therefore, every time you press the button, your consciousness has to go down the branch of reality in which you survive. At least in this thought experiment, subjectively speaking, you can't die. I mean, there'll be many versions of you in different branches of reality which do die, but your consciousness is going to follow that branch where you stay alive. Thus, on the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, quantum immortality. And actually the final entry on this iceberg, you cannot die from your perspective, I think is essentially getting at the same thing. One biographer of Everett states that, quote, Everett firmly believed that his many worlds theory guaranteed him immortality. His consciousness, he argued, is bound at each branching to follow whatever path does not lead to death. So what I was saying a moment ago about your consciousness always following the branch in which you stay alive, this biographer is suggesting Everett believed this about life in general, that you will always escape your death because there will always be a quantum reality in which you survived, and that's where your consciousness will go. Not just in this convoluted thought experiment, but just in life as a whole. Now, I don't know if Everett actually thought this is just one biographer's opinion, but it's an interesting thought. One interesting fact about quantum suicide is that it can only ever verify the many worlds interpretation. It can't falsify it. It can't prove it false, because in order to prove it false, the person doing the experiment would have to die. So if you keep on living, you can prove the theory might be true, but you can't prove with this experiment that it's false, because this would involve dying first. It also has to be you that does the experiment. You could get somebody else to press that button for you, but if you watch them die in front of you, all you know is you're in the branch of reality in which they died. You don't know where their consciousness has gone. The only person who can ever know the result of the experiment is the person doing the experiment. Another biographer of Everett, Wikipedia tells me, Peter Byrne, says that Everett also privately discussed quantum suicide, that is this weird thought experiment that we've just been talking about, but adds that, quote, it is unlikely, however, that Everett subscribed to this quantum immortality view, as the only sure thing it guarantees is that the majority of your copies will die. Hardly a rational goal. I don't know about that, because it seems to me that the point is that, yeah, lots of copies of you will die, but the one that retains your conscious experience will always be the one that remains alive. Hey, it's not super convincing, but neither are many of the other attempts at immortality that humans have come up with in the past. Now, this is at the bottom of the existential crisis iceberg. For a lot of people, the idea of living forever would be great news. But of course, it's also true that many people are terrified of the prospect of immortality. So if we've got no choice in the matter and we're all quantumly immortal whether we like it or not, for some people that's good news. For some people that's bad news. And hey, to rehearse one overused, famous YouTuber-y motto, let me know what you think down in the comments. So that's the existentialist iceberg. I may have got some of them wrong. I may have got most of them wrong. If you think that I did, Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Yeah. So, what a great video that was. Okay, so that existential idea at the end of the video, the idea that you can't, like, if you couple that maybe with a couple other ideas, for example, how you interpret others to be in your reality as side actors. You couple that idea with the idea of quantum immortality, that maybe I'm dead in others' universe. Maybe I died in others' universe, and maybe they died in mine, or maybe they're still alive, or who knows. Like, that's an interesting idea, because I know I'm still alive, right? Everybody can say that, I think. But interesting. That was an interesting thought experiment for sure. Okay, let's see. What's next up? Ooh, yeah. Okay, there's 2 videos coming up, and they're about masculine vulnerability, which is for men can be a very double-edged sword. And I thought that this was a good discussion. The first video really gives the insights and backgrounds that you need to understand the second video. So we'll take a look here. Doodle-doo. And this is by the title is Masculine Vulnerability. Attract women or repel them. Your Wingman. Yes. He has some great videos. I'll give you the video's link. Again, standing on the greatness giants here. We'll go ahead, and if you want to talk about it, we can stop and chat and figure things out. Whatever you need. Here you go.
Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about something that may seem counterintuitive, but trust me, it's going to change your life, because being vulnerable is actually a turn on and very attractive to high value, desirable women. I know what you're thinking. No way, Anna. Yes, vulnerability is often seen as a weakness, especially in a society that values strength and stoicism from men. But hear me out. Does this sound like you? You feel very uncomfortable opening up to people. Maybe so much so that you don't even approach women, or when you do, you mess up your conversations, or you might even get some dates, but eventually they kind of fizzle out, and you're starting to lose hope of ever finding someone special. Now let's see how we can change the trajectory of your story, and the reason a woman's biology is the reason the 2 types of vulnerability either attract her or instantly repel her. If you're new to my channel, I help men decode modern women so you can find, attract, and keep your keeper. My channel is for you if you accept that while women definitely need to learn and appreciate a lot more about men, you can only do what you can do. Welcome to Just the Tip. First, let's define what I mean by vulnerability. Vulnerability is about being open, honest, and transparent about your thoughts, feelings, and experiences without worrying too much about what others think or how they might judge you. So why is vulnerability such a turn-on for women? Ultimately, it's about confidence, but there's something else. It's the mentor of confidence, courage. And courage is being afraid but doing it anyway. And vulnerability takes a ton of courage. It shows you're confident and secure in yourself. When you're willing to be vulnerable by approaching women, talking with them, engaging with them, expressing your desire for them, escalating seduction, and expressing vulnerability in other ways, examples to follow, it shows you're comfortable in your own skin and you're able to be open and honest about your feelings. This kind of confidence is incredibly attractive. It shows women that you're emotionally intelligent. Key point. This kind of emotional intelligence is actually highly attractive to emotionally healthy women because it proves you're able to communicate effectively and handle your emotions in an emotionally healthy way. When you master masculine vulnerability with a woman, it allows for a deeper level of intimacy and connection. And more on how that influences some bang chicka wow wow in a minute. And key point, by opening up and sharing your true thoughts and feelings, you're inviting her to be able to do the same thing, creating a stronger bond. But there is a time when vulnerability is an instant major turnoff. How to tell if your expression of vulnerability will make her want to get closer to you or instantly repel her. Coming up. But first, let's look at your new story. You decide you are tired of being alone and lonely, and you do want to settle down without settling. You now know you'll need to be vulnerable with women in order to be able to get into a relationship that's deep and meaningful. And that's scary, no question. So your first call to action is to actually make the decision that you're willing to risk being vulnerable with women. This is a difficult choice for you, because you're afraid that by being vulnerable, it'll actually show weakness. And you tend to want to put your walls up when that happens. The first hurdle you face is the threshold, or the point of no return. This is the moment when you choose whether or not you're willing to take that risk, because you know that there is going to be pain and hurt along the way, because that's just part of the journey. So after a lot of contemplation and watching some of my videos, you decide, what the heck? It's worth the risk. I'm going to jump in and try this vulnerability thing. And as you navigate the challenges of being vulnerable, maybe you come back to this video, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you learn and remind yourself that to master masculine vulnerability is actually a sign of strength and courage, not weakness. You begin to embrace your vulnerability and discover that you are having more deep and meaningful conversations with the women you've been talking with. One day you meet a woman you instantly know has potential, long-term potential. You decide to go all in with positive vulnerability and leave negative vulnerability on the bench for now. Let's look at some examples of positive vulnerability. 1. You share your feelings about a difficult experience you're facing or have faced. Key point. And are overcoming or are learning from. By opening up about something that's been a challenge for you, you show that you're willing to be vulnerable and you trust her with this personal information. 2. You open up and are honest about an insecurity. Key point, that you are actively working on changing or accepting. Everyone has insecurities, and it can actually make her want to get closer to you when you share some of your insecurities. Now, this does seem counterintuitive, and I'm going to explain more on the negative side of this in a minute, so stick with me. By sharing your insecurity, you show her that you are comfortable enough to be open and honest and confident in yourself. You're not trying to hide it. There's no reason to hide it. And another way of doing this is number 3. You ask her opinion about something that's important to you. Key point, to show her you care about her thoughts and see her as a teammate. The key points are the hints as to what the vulnerabilities are that attract her and those that repel her. And don't worry, I'm going to spell it all out. Asking for women's help or support can be very difficult for men. They usually see this as a weakness, especially men who are people pleasers or feel the need to be self-sufficient. But by being willing to ask for her help, support, or input, you're actually showing her that you're confident enough within yourself to be vulnerable and that you respect her input. Okay, now I know what you're thinking, so let's address that. Asking for her help can be attractive because it shows that you're not so stuck on having to have it all figured out that you're not willing to ask other people for their input. You're comfortable being vulnerable in asking because you want to find a solution. Key point. Emotional positive or masculine vulnerability leads to emotional intimacy and intelligence. Emotional intimacy and intelligence makes her feel safe. And key point, emotional intimacy makes physical intimacy way better for her and you. Okay, now let's look at the difference between masculine and non-masculine vulnerability. It's actually about your mindset behind it. If your vulnerability comes from a place of love, compassion, empathy, or connection, well, that's damn sexy. Vulnerabilities that are turn-ons, telling a woman that you want her, telling your son you love him, shedding a tear when your dad dies or your dog, shedding a tear when Mel Gibson yells freedom at the end of Braveheart, and you're not even human if you didn't choke up at that scene. Now, what about the kind of vulnerability that instantly turns women off? This is expressed vulnerability that comes from a place of only fear, neediness, manipulation, or dependency, or victimhood. This kind of vulnerability is actually an instant turn-off to women because of biology. There's actually a biological reason why she can't control how she experiences positive, masculine, or negative, non-masculine vulnerability, and I'll share that in a moment. First, let's look at the previous examples as if they came from a place of non-masculine vulnerability. 1. You share your feelings about a difficult experience or challenge you're facing, but, key point, you haven't made any attempts to overcome it or learn from it. Fear, neediness, victimhood. By opening up about something that you're having a challenge with but are not willing to do anything about actually shows that you're willing to stay stuck in victim mode. Does that make a woman feel emotionally safe? Hint, no. 2, you've opened up and been honest about an insecurity, but, key point, you're not actively working on dealing with or fully accepting fear, neediness, victimhood, and potentially manipulation. As I've said, everyone's got insecurities, but, key point, if you're not working on overcoming it and constantly looking for her validation to feel okay, then she's going to go into mother mode, not lover mode. By sharing your insecurity in this way and not doing anything about it, it shows you're not actually comfortable in your own skin. 3, you ask for her opinion on something important. But, key point, it's not because you care about her thoughts and input as a teammate, but because you're completely lost and need to be taken care of. Fear, neediness, victimhood. Does that make her feel emotionally safe? No. Non-masculine vulnerability turn-offs. Sharing your sob story to try to manipulate her into liking you. Blaming others for where you are in life. Crying or begging her to give you another chance. That's a really instant turn-off. Complaining that Josh got a promotion even though you always leave work early. And bitch about your boss. Now, you may think she's just mean and selfish, but there's a huge difference between nurturing and mothering. This is biology. She can't control her biology. Just like you look at boobs. You can't help but notice DNA, because you're a guy. Key point. Nurturing comes from a place of feminine generosity when she feels safe in your masculine frame. Mothering comes from a place of necessity when she doesn't feel safe in your masculine frame. Essentially, you're taking on the role of a child, therefore she must take on the role of the mother. If you act like a dependent, like a child, a needy child, she will instantly get turned off and go into mother mode. Mother mode suppresses arousal mode. Of course, some days, even the most masculine, strong, emotionally centered men have days where they feel afraid. This is a natural emotion, especially if you're taking risks in life. But, key point, in order for her to feel safe in your overall masculinity and strength, when those weak moments of non-masculine vulnerability do show up, she needs to have enough strong, positive masculine vulnerability and other traits in the piggy bank so that she can draw on that when you have days or moments, not days, moments of vulnerability that is coming from a place of weakness. In other words, nope. You can't be weak or scared most of the time, or at least you can't express that to her. And yes, sometimes it's a fine line. You may be feeling love and fear, but one will have a greater weight for you in that situation. And deep down, you know which one that is. So is it coming from fear or is it coming from love? When you've mastered masculine vulnerability, she'll be attracted to your confidence and emotional intelligence. And then you can begin a deeply satisfying relationship with some of the best you've ever had. The right type of vulnerability is not a weakness. It's actually a strength, and it will help you find, attract, and keep a keeper who you can develop a deep and meaningful connection with. It is possible to find love by being open and honest with women, and mastering masculine vulnerability is the key to finding and keeping a keeper. And if you want to know the difference between a masculine vulnerability and non-masculine vulnerability with a couple of real life examples, you'll want to watch my video on She Leaves a Guy at Rock Bottom and find out at the end what happened to Bob when he lost his job right after getting married. You'll want to be like Bob. And if you have struggled with some insecurities that you're just having a difficult time getting through or getting past, then I encourage you to talk to a counselor or therapist. If you don't have someone, I do have a company that I recommend. And if you use my link, then you will get a discount on your first session. Thanks for being here. God bless.
Alrighty. So that is the first part, and we'll get on to the second part here. This is the second part, and she will reference this, and I will throw this link, excuse me, into the chat. And this is women deeply respect men who follow these principles by your Wingman. Definitely standing on shoulders of greats here. Please go and check out her info. Yeah. And we'll go ahead and play here.
Deep respect that makes a woman want to stick by your side.
Let's back that
through
up
thick and
a little
thin.
bit. There we go.
Okay, guys, let's talk about respect. And no, not just the polite please and thank you kind of respect. We're talking about the kind of deep respect that makes a woman want to stick by your side through thick and thin. Now, if you're new to my channel, my name is Anna Jorgensen. I help good men just like you decode modern women so you can find, attract, and keep your keeper, or simply have better relationships with women if you prefer to stay single. Welcome to Just the Tip. Now be sure to watch to the end to find out about a new coaching program. Okay, it's no secret that emotionally healthy women, the kind I assume you want as a long-term mate, crave stability, security, and leadership from their men. But how do you get there? Well, gentlemen, you follow these 10 time-tested principles. If you do, you'll be able to attract the kind of woman you want to wake up to for the rest of your life. If you don't, no good woman will respect you, and neither will anyone else, including, most importantly, yourself. So let's take a look at these principles, including examples, whether you're courting, aka making first impressions, dating, aka developing a connection, or already in a relationship, aka long-term love. Number 10 may surprise you. Be sure to keep track of how well you do on each of these traits by sharing your score in the comments. And remember, none of us is perfect, so give yourself some grace. Most of these traits are also attractive in women. Let's go. Okay, 1, stand by your values. Women respect a man with a backbone, someone who stands firm in his beliefs and values. This doesn't mean you need to go all on about your political or philosophical ideals at every chance. It means you're a man of integrity. You say what you mean and you mean what you say. If honesty, loyalty, and kindness are values you hold dear, you don't compromise them to win her favor or anyone else's. Women can smell a man who's a pushover from a mile away, and it's not attractive. Stand firm in your values, even when it's not easy, and watch how her respect of you grows. Examples: courting. Let's say when she suggests something that doesn't align with your values, you could say something like, I appreciate the invite, but I don't drink. That's just a personal choice I stick to. Or if you're dating, when she teases you about your habit of getting up early to go to the gym, you say, I've made early mornings part of my routine. It keeps me grounded. In a relationship, when deciding on how to handle a disagreement, you could say, I'm not okay with sweeping this under the rug this time. We need to talk this through. 2, pursue purpose, not just passion. Everyone loves the idea of finding your passion, but passion alone is fleeting. What earns respect is having a purpose, something bigger than just today's desires and pleasures. Whether it's your career or a personal goal or a cause you care about, having a mission shows her you're driven by something beyond instant gratification. This doesn't mean you ignore your relationship or play hard to get. It means you know what you're aiming for in life and you work toward it consistently. Women admire men who live with intention and purpose. And as an aside, most men, pretty much all men, need to have a purpose to feel okay in life. I don't even know how to describe that. You need purpose. Let's look at some examples. Courting. When she asks what you're focused on these days, you say, well, I've been dedicating time to growing my business. It's been challenging, but it's what I love. Dating. When talking about future goals, you could say something like, I'm working towards getting my certification on something that will help level up my career. Or if you're in a relationship, when discussing future life plans together, you might say, well, my long-term goal is to invest in property. I'm setting things up to make that happen. 3, lead but don't control. So leadership and control are not the same thing. Women respect men who take charge respectfully and confidently, not in a domineering or controlling manner. Leading means being decisive, having a plan, and being willing to take responsibility when things go wrong. It also means listening to her opinions and considering her perspective. Strong leadership is about collaboration, not dictatorship. When you lead, it makes her feel secure and respected, which makes her respect you more. Example: courting. When planning a first date, you say, I've booked us a table at 7 at this great spot. If you're good with that, let's do it. Dating. When discussing weekend plans, you could say something like, how about we hike in the morning and then grab some lunch after? Is that a yes? Relationship. When planning a vacation together, you could say, I'll handle the booking and the flights and hotel. Let's talk about what places you want to see. 4, emotional stability. Let's get one thing straight. Being emotionally stable doesn't mean being emotionless. Women respect men who can handle their emotions in a mature way. If you're constantly reacting impulsively or getting defensive or blowing up over minor things, it signals immaturity and insecurity. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, most of these can apply to women as well in some way. On the flip side, if you're in tune with your emotions, but don't let them control you, she'll see you as someone she can rely on. Emotional stability means not being swayed by every little thing and knowing how to process your feelings without dragging her into your emotional chaos. Examples: courting. When something unexpected happens, like the restaurant losing your reservation, you say something like, no worries, we'll figure something out. I know another great place nearby. Or dating. When she's upset over something small, you say, okay, Let's not let this ruin our night. You can talk it out if you want. Relationship. When she's emotional about an issue, you could say something like, I'm here for you. Let's take our time figuring this out. Isn't that what you would want to hear when you're upset? Exactly. This is not about ignoring red flags. No, more on that in a minute. 5, be authentic. There's nothing sexier or more respectable than authenticity. Pretending to be something you're not to impress a woman or anyone is the fastest way to lose their respect. If you're confident in who you are and aren't afraid to show your true self, flaws and all, she'll not only respect you, but appreciate you more. Authenticity also means being vulnerable at the right times, letting her in on your challenges and sometimes insecurities, but not making her responsible for fixing them. There is a huge difference between attractive vulnerability and unattractive vulnerability, and you want to watch my video on that, but be real, not a facade. Example. Courting. When sharing your thoughts about a topic, you might say something like, well, actually, I'm not into that trendy stuff. I prefer staying true to what works for me. Or dating. When she asks about your taste in music, you say, I know it's old school, but I'm a classic rock kind of guy at heart. Or in a relationship, when discussing your feelings about something difficult, you might say, I'm not great at this, but I need to tell you, I've been feeling stressed at work. And again, if you want to know the difference between weak and strong vulnerability, then you'll want to watch this video after or later or at some point. Okay, let's move on. 6, set boundaries and respect hers. Respect is a two-way street. A woman will respect a man who sets clear boundaries in his life, whether it's with his time or his energy or even his personal space. In fact, the only way she can respect you is if you respect yourself. This shows that you respect yourself. Now, on the flip side, respecting her boundaries is just as important. Don't push or test the limits when she needs space or time to reset. Respecting each other's boundaries builds mutual respect and strengthens trust. Example, courting. When she hints at taking things slower, you could say, I'm cool with going at your pace. I respect where you're at the same time, I need XYZ. Dating. When she's not ready to introduce you to her family yet, you could say, no rush, we'll meet them when you feel it's the right time. Relationship. When she wants alone time after an argument, you could say, take the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. Now, if she's prone to not coming back to the topic, you can say instead, let's reconvene on this discussion on the weekend. Number 7, keep your word. Consistency is key. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If you make a promise, follow through. Nothing diminishes respect faster than broken promises or flaking out. Women want to know they can count on you, and part of that comes from being reliable. Being dependable isn't only about showing up when you say you will, it's about being consistent in your actions, your words, and your treatment of her. Examples. Courting. After agreeing to a time to meet up, you say, I need to do some work after our date, but I'll pick you up at 7 as promised. Dating. When you promise to help her move next Saturday, but your buddy from high school is in town, you say, don't worry, I've already got my day cleared for helping you move, and I've got an extra set of hands. Relationship. When making a promise to move in by a certain time, but you're not quite ready, you could say, I'm committed to this relationship, and I do mean it. At the same time, I have some concerns. Before we start packing, let's talk about the logistics of living together. Number 8, maintain independence. Okay, so while relationships do thrive on togetherness, women respect a man who also has his own life interests and independence. You don't need to be attached at the hip to prove you care. In fact, keeping some individuality makes the relationship stronger. It shows you're self-sufficient, confident, and not needy. Needing constant validation or attention can push her away. Key point. Needy men create naggy women. Mother mode suppresses lover mode. Instead, maintain your independence while still being a supportive partner. This balance is crucial for long-term respect. It also makes you more interesting and maintains a healthy subconscious niggling that you're okay solo and attractive to other women. Examples, let's say courting. When she suggests canceling your weekend plans to hang out, you say, I've got plans with friends this weekend, but let's find another time next week. Don't justify or over-explain yourself, but do answer reasonable questions. What's reasonable? What would you want to know? Dating. When she asks if you can skip your hobby to hang out, you could say, you know what, I've got my guys' night tonight, but how's your day tomorrow? In a relationship, when balancing time between your relationship and personal interests, you could say, I'm going to head out to work on my project for a bit. I'll be back in time to go for dinner. Number 9. Protect and provide. Okay, so biology is a thing, gentlemen. Women are naturally attracted to men who can and will provide and protect. This doesn't just mean financially, though that is a part of it. Like it or not, most women want a man who makes more than them or has a high status masculine job like a fireman. If that's not you, do not fret. Providing can also include emotional support, security, and being an emotionally strong, steady presence in her life. Protecting her doesn't mean you're jumping into every argument she has with her boss or her friends. It means you're there when she needs you, physically, emotionally, and mentally. Examples: courting. When she's worried about getting home late, you might say, let me walk you to your car. I want to make sure you're safe. Now, if she's a feminist, say it with a cheeky grin and a wink to offset her automatic indoctrination trigger. Dating. When she's stressed about her workload, you could say, you know what, let's break it down together. Or do you want the weekend to yourself just to catch up? Okay, so relationship. When she's feeling anxious about the state of the world, you could say, you know what, whatever happens, I got your back. We'll face it together. Key point for the ladies on what a man needs in lieu of protection and provision. Men need our unequivocal loyalty, not just sexual fidelity, but emotional loyalty. It can be displayed as simply as defending him without question, even if you disagree. Protect his pride in public, discuss your differences in private. Now, just before I reveal number 10, which may surprise you, if you have found value in this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing. And be sure to watch to the end if you want to know what to do if you follow these principles and she still doesn't treat you with respect. Okay, number 10, stay humble but confident. So confidence is a major turn on, but arrogance, well, not so much. Now, unless she's a gold digger or excessively shallow, women respect men who know their worth but don't need to shout it from the rooftops. A humble man doesn't seek validation from others or need to show off his achievements. He's secure in himself but doesn't flaunt it. Being humble doesn't mean being meek or passive. Heck no, it means knowing your strengths and acting from a place of quiet confidence. Now, this can vary a bit from culture and country. Example, courting. When she compliments your success, you could say, thanks, I've worked hard for it, but I'm always learning. Now, just a tip for ladies, we do not compliment men nearly enough, often because we're afraid they will use it to get something from us. This is not how emotionally healthy men are built. If you compliment him, he will be more inspired to do more of what got him that praise. Don't abuse this info. Okay, dating. When she praises your ability to handle changes or challenges, you say something like, I've learned a lot through trial and error. I'm a work in progress, but I'm getting there. In a relationship, when she tells you how much she appreciates you, you could say, I'm lucky to have you too. We make a great team. Deep respect doesn't come just from treating each other well, though that is a big part of it. It's about living by a set of principles that show you are a mate of value. When a man embodies these principles, women will naturally respect you, and that respect, my friend, is the foundation of lasting, loyal love. But what if you live by these principles and she still treats you like a rubbish? Remember, it's a team effort. She needs to abide these principles as well. Speaking of team effort, if you're ready to stop wasting time on the throwbacks and finally meet the kind of woman who deeply respects you, my new coaching program is exactly what you need. You'll learn to master online dating if you so choose to, flirting, having true confidence with women, to finding your keeper, or simply getting some action if that's what you prefer. Spots are limited, so click the link in the description or the pinned comment or the QR code and book a free call. Let's get you the results you want. Now, go out there and start living these principles like the king I know you are. Lots of love. God bless.
Cool. Yes, certainly. Go ahead and check out Angela's material. Yeah, just realized something. Yeah, okay. So our next video coming up here was our Take Over the World video. And that that was about the issue that Russia is going to be facing in a post-Ukrainian war world. If they had to stop today, what it would mean for the country. So, yeah, just from a population standpoint, again, grandkids, all about the grandkids. So here is the video. Russia's population problem from Warfronts. Definitely go ahead. I'll throw this in chat. Go ahead and visit. Please support the Warfronts. And yeah, we'll go here and let her roll.
With no sign of resolution in sight. The consequences when it finally goes off. There is a ticking time bomb with an ever-shortening fuse planted just beneath the country of Russia. For decades, it's been allowed to tick away, uninhibited, with no sign of resolution in sight. The consequences when it finally goes off will be catastrophic for Moscow. You see, Russia has a population problem. Poor Soviet-era policy and mismanagement since its collapse has led to a situation where the average Russian couple are not replacing themselves by having children. Adults are dying early, migration only acts as a partial solution, and hundreds of thousands of Russian men have become casualties in Ukraine. We're going to delve into the facts here and see if Russia's past and present is costing the Kremlin its future. Russia is running out of Russians. So, what are the facts on the ground here? What kind of demographic crisis is Russia really facing? Well, Russia's population today stands at around 144 million people, and it's been that way since the 1990s. Russia for decades, alongside the USSR before it, used various strategies and tricks to stave off population decline and keep the number of people in Russia at a stable level. But as we've entered the 21st century, several factors that have been working against Russia have started to get worse, paving the way for a potential rapid decline in population in the near future. The yearly growth rate of the Russian population fell in the 90s and simply never recovered, and now those demographic issues are coming home to roost for the Kremlin. Today we're going to go into detail about how Russia's birth rate, its death rate, its level of migration, and the war in Ukraine are all contributing to future Russian population decline. In highly populated oblasts like Leningrad and Sevastopol, Russian women on average give birth to less than one child in their lifetimes. Reuters reports that the Kremlin described the crisis as, quote, a disaster for the country in 2024. Russian President Vladimir Putin has seemingly understood the scope of the issue for quite some time. In his inaugural 2000 address to the nation, Putin warned that Russia could become an enfeebled nation due to its population decline. In the 2010 consensus, it was recorded that 20,000 villages in Russia were completely abandoned, with another 36,000 housing fewer than 10 people, according to Al Jazeera. In 2022, the situation became so bad that President Putin reintroduced a Soviet-era medal to be given to mothers alongside a cash sum for those who gave birth to 10 children. It's fair to say that the Kremlin is clutching at straws. But what are the reasons for this decline? Just how did this situation get so feeble? The first, and one of the most important factors to look at in controlling a population's relative growth, is the birth rate. Russia has been suffering with a persistent difficulty in achieving higher birth rates ever since the Soviet era. The number of births in any country is known as the total fertility rate, or TFR for short. In order to maintain a population without increased migration, the TFR for a country needs to be around 2.1, according to the Atlantic Council, or AC, although Russia's higher than average adult mortality rate means that it may even need to be higher. Russia has not approached a TFR of 2.1 since around 1988, and this in large part contributes to Russia's consistent population decline. One reason for this is the legacy of Soviet policy. Russia in the Soviet era had less access to effective birth control, and there was a resistance among Russian men to adopt the use of condoms. But Simon, I hear you cry, surely that led to more pregnancies. And, well, you'd be right. But many of these pregnancies were unwanted, and with no other solutions, abortion was widely utilized. American economist Mare Feshbach was able to calculate that the Soviet-era abortion rate averaged 7 abortions per woman. Economics is also linked closely to birth rates. When a country is doing well and times are good, people have more kids because they are in a position to financially look after and raise them. When times are tough, misery consumes and there are already enough mouths to feed, which prevents prospective pregnant people from planning potential parenthood. Even in the Soviet era, many struggled to get by, which meant that the birth rate among certain sections of Russia has struggled for decades, and when pregnancy did occur, economic circumstances may have pushed women towards options like abortion instead. This economic issue, of course, did not get any better after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1990. The breakdown of the Warsaw Pact and the wider USSR disrupted decades-long economic linkages, supply chains, and cooperation agreements. Such economic insecurity only worsened the problem across the whole post-Soviet space, but especially in Russia. In the 1990s, the RAND Corporation reported the result of all these disruptions was the decline of the Russian birth rate to among the lowest on Earth, and abortion rates rising to among the highest. At the turn of the millennium, when Vladimir Putin came to prominence, the Russian TFR was 1.25, almost half of what the country would need to sustain its population. Ironically, the motherland wasn't a big fan of motherhood. Russia's TFR has continued to slump and drag. In 2006, Putin's rhetoric around the demographic crisis facing Russia turned into actual policies for the first time. At the time, the president, still in his first term, launched a national agenda to try and bring the birth rate back up again. The Kremlin prioritized and emphasized a program known as maternity capital. This offered incentives to women for the birth or adoption of another child, usually in the form of financial compensation. The funds would be paid to a family when the state-incentivized child turned 3 years old. The funds could be used for housing, the child's education, the mother's pension, and even assistance for children with disabilities. It might be the most progressive policy Putin ever produced. This has since been amended over time to include payments for a first child, as well as improving housing. This did encourage additional births among rural populations, but in urban populations, where the cost was higher and 70% of the population lived, it failed to make a dramatic impact. Russia's TFR did increase a little, though, and by 2007 it was 1.39. It even reached a peak of a staggering 1.8 in 2015, but this was owing to a larger number of Russian women reaching childbearing age and an economic boost in the form of high oil prices. But again, it didn't last. By 2021, the TFR was back to 1.49. In 2022, the Center for Eastern Studies claimed the Russian birth rate was at 9 per 1,000 residents, making it one of the lowest in the world. The Atlantic Council reported that by 2023, births reflected the lowest fertility rate in the past 2 or 3 centuries in Russia. The ongoing war in Ukraine, financial difficulties in Russia itself, and the increased misery that is born from that has ensured the birth rate is still declining. According to an October 2023 survey by Russian Field, Russians are pessimistic about the future. 43% expected their financial situation to worsen within the next year or two, while only 21% anticipated an improvement. Would you want to bring a child into the world with all of that uncertainty and economic difficulty? It's a choice a lot of Russians have declined. But there may be more consequence to Russia's population decline, and that's not how often Russians are born, but how often they die. It's not just the birth rate of a nation that is important in assessing its population projections, but arguably more important is the death rate. As the higher the rate, the faster the population will decline, and the more measures need to be introduced to stop it, as well as the more births are needed to successfully offset it. But this isn't easy. Russia has been unable to solve endemic issues in the nation's public health system that have been contributing to a higher death rate for decades now. Throughout the life cycle of the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation, unhealthy diets and lifestyles, binge alcohol consumption and accidents have all contributed to higher than average mortality numbers. By the 1960s, Russia's high infant mortality and low adult life expectancy were outliers compared with most highly industrialized countries. Russia's toxic relationship with alcohol has long affected its population adversely. Former USSR Premier Mikhail Gorbachev's anti-alcohol campaign in the late 80s generated a brief reprieve where life expectancy increased, but it didn't have a long-lasting legacy. And in the late 1990s, the RAND Corporation reported that Russia was still experiencing unusually high death rates from non-natural causes, many of which were related in some way to alcoholism. When President Putin was first elected at the turn of the millennium, Russian men aged 18 to 64 were dying at 4 times the rate of European men, according to the Atlantic Council. Meanwhile, Russian women were dying at about the same rate as European men. Statista shows that the Russian life expectancy for men has never even gone above 68, whilst Russian women's rate has never risen above 80. Both are below their counterparts in other industrialized parts of the world. The AC also states that Russia's TFR dropped back to 1.5 by 2019 as Russia's COVID response resulted in the highest per capita death rate among industrialized nations. Even in 2022, and not taking into account the Ukraine conflict, Russian men die at twice the rate of European men. Russian men die, on average, 6 years sooner than in Bangladesh, another nation which has faced immense financial hardship. So, the birth rate has plummeted, and Russia's death rates are some of the highest of their near peers in the entire world. So, how do you remedy a situation like that? Is Russia's population doomed to slowly wither away to nothing? Well, not exactly. Moscow does have a few tricks up its sleeve to slow the decline. One of those tricks: migration. Another key factor that influences a population's growth and decline is its net migration, which just means the number of people coming into the country to live and work minus the number that leave. Russian economic issues that began with Gorbachev's perestroika continued into the 1990s, which alongside higher mortality and fewer births led to significant emigration out of Russia. The collapse of the Soviet Union spurred a massive population relocation, where those with different ethnicities to Russia left for their newly created homelands, especially in Central Asia. This reorganization also led to an immigration crisis in Russia proper, as Russians who were in other parts of the Soviet Union returned to the motherland. Data from the Russian State Statistics Service, Goskonstat, indicate legal immigration peaked at 1.147 million people in 1994 and declined each year thereafter, shrinking to 350,900 in 2000 and just 70,000 in 2004. These declining numbers and the ongoing demographic issues weren't exactly a secret, as we saw from RAND's 1997 report. This makes the Russian government's choice to adopt a highly restrictive legal migration law in 2002 all the more baffling. This law came even despite Putin's comments on the demographic crisis just 2 years before. The remigration did largely offset the population loss in the 90s, despite huge hits to public health and the economy, otherwise dragging it down, but it could not last. There were only so many Russians living in former Soviet republics that chose to come home. By 2005, though, it was clear this wasn't working, as the number of those returning to Russia was diminishing each year on average. This may have later prompted Putin's various policy attempts to bring the birth rate back up. It's not simply a question of ensuring enough people come into the country, however, but also the number of people who've left. Even before the war in Ukraine began, Russia had been experiencing a significant brain drain, a phenomenon where educated people in a population leave a country en masse to seek a brighter future elsewhere. Educated Russians were choosing to leave in favor of work in places like the US, Europe, and even China. 3 places that prospectively offer higher salaries and better quality of life for the educated. The Atlantic Council reports that just before the war, Valery Falkov, Russia's Minister of Science and Higher Education, told Putin that the number of scientists in Russia was declining. Nikolai Dolgushkin, the Russian Academy of Sciences chief scientific secretary, reported that emigration by scientists had increased from 14,000 in 2012 to 70,000 in 2021. Russia was the only developed nation where the number of scientific personnel was shrinking rather than growing. This is a far cry from the thousands of dedicated and intelligent Soviet scientists committing their work and lives to the USSR in years gone by. Russia has had to increasingly turn to migration in order to keep the economy going as the Russian population continues to falter. In the late 2010s and early 2020s, there was a dramatic increase in the number of Russian passports issued to foreigners, from around 269,000 in 2018 to a record 735,000 in 2021. This suggests that the Kremlin currently treats naturalization as a method to fill demographic gaps. However, this too has failed to address the core issue of population decline. It will not make people live longer or have more children by itself. The Center for Eastern Studies stated that since 2020, positive net migration no longer compensates for the natural population decline in Russia. It is no longer enough to simply bring more people in. This will have long-standing consequences for Russia's demography as a whole, as the more non-ethnic Russians brought in to bridge the employment gap, the less dominant the Russian diaspora becomes over time. This is a lose-lose situation for the Kremlin, and in 2022, a certain conflict made the issue of migration a whole lot worse. Of course, we're yet to talk about the 3-day special military operation-sized elephant in the room, and that, of course, is the ongoing war in Ukraine. As you might imagine, the number of Russian soldiers, conscripted or otherwise, who have been killed in the fighting is growing daily. This is naturally exacerbating the demographic crisis that Russia is facing at home. The USA puts the total number of killed and wounded Russians at around 315,000. The UK's Ministry of Defence puts the number at 450,000, and the Atlantic Council goes as high as 500,000, as corroborated by French intelligence. If you want to know more about how these figures are calculated, take a look at our Counting the Dead videos on this channel. Heavy casualties in Ukraine means a smaller population of Russians will have to fill those gaps in the economy by taking up jobs vacated by now deceased or wounded soldiers. Russia's unemployment rate is already very low due to the war and existing crisis, and the economy may be forced to shrink in order to accommodate having fewer workers. The consequences of the war isn't solely placed on the soldiers, however, when it comes to demographic problems. Women in Russia are choosing to forego having children, and women themselves are also being sent to fight in Ukraine in small numbers, mostly from prison populations. What's more, hundreds of thousands of young and educated Russian citizens have left the country in order to avoid being conscripted by Moscow, further contributing to a severe demographic decline. It's hard to know just how many potential soldiers have left Russia in the mobilization panic. The Atlantic Council reports that as many as 700,000 Russians are currently living in Dubai. If that is any indicator of the wider trend, well over 1 million Russians may be currently living outside of their nation. In 2023, the Atlantic Council stated that the number of people trying to return to Russia was the lowest in a decade, with mobilization being a likely deterrent. The Kremlin appears to have tried several strategies in order to enlist as many soldiers as possible, whilst also trying not to damage ethnic Russian populations too much. And so where are Russians getting the majority of their soldiers? Rural areas, of course. Non-ethnic Russians appear to be targeted for conscription more than ethnic Russians, as Central Asians working in Russia have also been rounded up and sent to join the front. The AC states that a study of the Uzbek community in Russia reports that many Uzbeks have been arrested for minor or contrived offenses and sentenced to elaborate prison terms, often of 15, 20, or even 25 years. Once in prison, they are offered the Wagner option of volunteering to fight in Ukraine. Many likely take the offer, seeing it as the only choice to hopefully survive and return to their lives once the war is over. This is a double-edged sword for the Kremlin, as whilst it doesn't put as many ethnic Russians, Moscow's priority, in harm's way, non-Russian birth rates are higher, especially in more religious communities like Chechnya and Orthodox regions. Utilizing the few people whose birth rates in Russia is actually above the rate of replacement doesn't seem overly sensible in the middle of a demographic crisis. But there is a war on. The soldiers have got to come from somewhere. Moscow clearly recognizes the requirement for balance between the military crisis in Ukraine and the demographic crisis at home. Men with 3 or more children are exempt from being conscripted to fight by Russian law, which will have encouraged couples with 2 children to have a third and somewhat offset that decline. However, given the propensity for the Russian military to target almost anybody for recruitment from the ages of 18 to 70, it's hard to know how much this is actually upheld in practice. The Russians really will take anybody they can get. One way to make up the number of soldiers is with prisoners, as we've seen in the Wagner Group strategy. This recruitment pool has continued to be used after the death of Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin and the integration of Wagner into the Russian armed forces. Ironically, those who had originally made the deal of bullets for freedom served their 6 months in the military and were dutifully released, whilst many non-criminal recruits have been fighting continuously in Ukraine for years now. Many of their contracts not set to end until the war does. We have also seen soldiers' wages in Russia continue to steeply increase as fewer people take the gamble to risk their lives for a financial incentive. The Kremlin is getting desperate. It's not just from more fringe groups inside of Russia where soldiers are conscripted, but outside Russia as well. The AC reports that individuals from Nepal, Syria, and India have been recruited to work in factories or as guards at various venues in Russia. After they arrive, their passports are confiscated and they are sent to fight in Ukraine. What choice do they have so far from home with no passport and no way to defend themselves? In addition to higher wages, prison offers, and straight-up kidnapping people from other countries, another inducement to attract foreign fighters is the offer of Russian citizenship. If these commitments are honored, the result will be to add more non-Russians to the country's population who fought alongside it and therefore, in theory, share similar cultural values. although he cannot imagine how having Russian citizenship is in any way advantageous right now, considering it's a one-way ticket to the front. Perhaps desperate enough economic migrants from Central Asia would make the journey in hope of providing a better future for their families once the war is over. However, even this may not be overly enticing, considering that one may well be able to move to Russia post-war with a similar result through employment rather than getting bombed and shot at. The demographic crisis is not going away. Russia will still need the workers post-war. Migrants are not stupid, and many may have seen the writing on the wall when war broke out. According to the Center for Eastern Studies, there are half as many foreign workers in Russia in 2023 as there were in 2021. It does also represent another demographic issue with the war in Ukraine, as able-bodied working men are being made casualties in the thousands every month. So the Kremlin must accept higher levels of immigration in the short term in order to fill those gaps in the economy. But Russia has been on this path for more than a decade. In 2014, when Russia illegally annexed Crimea, it added 2.4 million people to the Russian population, at least by the Kremlin's own figures, but this limited the natural labor pool that already flowed into Russia from Moldova and Ukraine. As a result, after 2014, labor migration in Russia was limited to mostly just 5 Central Asian countries. In 2023, half of Russia's labor migrants came from Tajikistan alone. So why do this? Why, in the middle of a demographic crisis, did Vladimir Putin choose to start a military conflict with a neighbor which only made said crisis a million times worse? Well, there are a few explanations. The first being that big bad Vlad thought Russia would easily win. Lest we forget that special military operation was only to last 3 days, with the toppling of the Zelensky regime, the capture of Kiev, and the integration of Ukraine into the Russian motherland. If handled successfully, it would have added 38 million more people to the country with barely a shot fired. Putin was led to believe that the Ukrainians would welcome the Russian invaders with open arms as liberators. So, them choosing to take up arms against those forces so effectively definitely proved a shock. This means that whilst invading Ukraine may have been seen from the outset as a demographic crisis solution, the extension of the war has only exacerbated the problem. Putin's rhetoric at the start of the war was that Ukraine was Russian, its citizens were Russian, and therefore it should be a part of Russia. So adding nearly 40 million Russians to the declining population would be an easy way for the Kremlin to go some way to fixing their demographic crisis. But Putin lost that gamble when Ukraine rallied. They were Ukrainian, and they did not want to join Russia. It may also be possible that Putin wasn't totally misled, but saw the writing on the wall. As we've already covered, Putin started talking about Russia's demographic crisis as far back as in 2000, almost a generation ago. Since then, the population has continued to decline, birth rates have decreased, death rates are high, migration is low, and none of Putin's policies implemented were able to stop the rot, only slow it for a while. Putin could have taken one look at the sliding downward trajectory of the Russian population crisis in 2022 and knew that drastic action was required. Putin himself was 70 years old at the time, likely thinking about his legacy in Russia, and alongside preconceived delusions of grandeur and a desire to be a hero who returned glory to Mother Russia. Turns out he couldn't seize a chick in Kiev, let alone the real thing. The population crisis was only going to get worse, and Putin was only going to get older. So when 2022 rolled around, it may have been a case of, if not now, then when? The irony, of course, is that Putin's legacy has been damaged by the war. In trying to do something drastic to fix the demographic crisis, he has inadvertently accelerated it. This, of course, has come with huge consequences. The Russian population is an aging one, and there already were not enough young Russian people to take care of the elderly and run Russian society before the war began. The war, the migration of Russians, and the destitution that communities have been left in only stands to ensure 2 things for the foreseeable future. This problem is not going to go away, and it's not going to get better for the Kremlin. But what are the consequences of Russia's population crisis? We talk about this crisis like it's a big deal. The Kremlin and even Putin himself seem to agree. So what exactly has the Russian state been trying to avoid here? So what does all of this mean for the future of the Russian Federation? Well, the prognosis isn't good. Putin's choice of timing for military aggression in Ukraine might have reflected an understanding that Russia's demographic situation would not improve in the next 2 decades. But indeed, the war is turning a crisis into a catastrophe. Russia's situation is particularly challenging. Between the birth rates, death rates, migration rates, the brain drain, and the war, policy by itself might not be enough to fix it. The Rand Corporation questioned in 1997 how a shrinking working age population will support a growing number of elderly Russian citizens. It's a generation later, and that's no longer a question. It's a reality, especially with swaths of working-age Russian men being sent to die in Ukraine. The Center for Eastern Studies has stated that the decline in Russia's fertility rate since the war is set to stabilize, and that there is no indication that the war will or has caused a decrease in total Russian fertility numbers. But this isn't just about the war, which, whilst consequential, is dwarfed by decades of failed policy and inaction as the sands of time slowly trickle down the hourglass. Russia's population, like many others in industrialized nations, is set to shrink. The Economist remarked that the Russian population would drop by almost 15 million people by 2050. UN projections for 2100 are even worse, with Russia on the high end predicted to be about 112 million people, on the low end 74 million, which is around half of what it is today in as little as 75 years. That's 3 generations, a dramatic decrease in a very short time. Now, the world population is also said to decrease by 2100 by around 20%, but Russia's decline will be at least 25%, if not 50%. Russia and the future leaders of the Russian Federation have an important choice to make that will impact the future makeup of Russia as we know it. Either policy is changed for the better, public health improves drastically, and the life expectancy of the average Russian joins the rest of the developed world, or there will need to be a way to naturalize non-Russian citizens as Russians en masse. Putin's gambit in Ukraine to do this failed. It cannot be done by force. Russia will have to entice people to it. But that's easier said than done. Wages in Russia are low compared to its counterparts. The economy only stands to shrink further as the population does. Russia would have to offer something that it isn't offering right now to really make a difference. But this will have its own consequences too. Ramping up migration will change the ethnic demography of Russia over time. Just slapping a citizenship test on an Uzbek, a Tajik, or a Kazakh and labeling them a Russian doesn't necessarily make it so. It doesn't erase their cultural heritage, upbringing, or perspective on the world. Russia is running out of Russians. Making more is not easy. What's more is that the demographic groups best matching Putin's August 2022 decree advocating preservation and strengthening traditional Russian spiritual moral values are Russia's non-Russian populations. What Putin is searching for amongst his people already exists, with minority areas of Russia not experiencing the same population issues as ethnic Russian areas are. But to Putin, these minorities are not Russian in the classical sense. He cannot prioritize them over the ethnic Russian population or potentially risk the most important thing of all to him, his regime security. The minorities in Russia have cultures that are distinct. They have languages and traditions that do not match the current Russian status quo. But if Putin wants to bring his population growth rate back into the black, he may have to strike a deal with Central Asian populations and Russian minority groups like the Tatars, Dagestanis, and Chechens. Russia will almost certainly have to be ethnically less Russian and more religiously diverse if the population is to recover. Putin may need to incorporate what is working for them into the rest of Russia, or face a continued population collapse that will be as severe as it would be devastating. For the future, Russia's population will not only be smaller, but also older, more fragile, and less well-educated, making it harder to build sustained growth. It may well spell the end of Russia as one of the heads of the geopolitical table as their capability and economic population shrinks. Many countries will face a decline in their population, but not many will be facing the sheer scope of issues in terms of demography that Russia will. Many more may grow to surpass it in time too. It remains to be seen to what extent Russia will decline, but unless drastic changes are made in the near future, that decline to some extent is almost inevitable, and that could make Vladimir Putin a very dangerous man indeed.
Very, very dangerous man indeed. So, the declining birth rate that started after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989, the decline birth rate, the increased death rate has kind of wiped out, or is about to wipe out, a large portion of the Russian people, leaving at the best not enough Russian to look after the aging Russian population. Yeah. And Putin was trying to solve that problem by going into Ukraine. That didn't work. So now, Russian generation will pay the price. Unfortunately. Unfortunately. Hey.
I'm Dr. Orion
Whoops.
Teraband.
Yes. Yes, you are. So our next video was on Women's Truth Night. And that was, I think that was Wednesday. That was a PhD in men from Dr. Orion Teraband. So you right here, the video. Of course, this is video, a PhD in men, how to get what you want from a man from Psychacks. Very much encourage you to go and check out his videos and content. He's a master. He's really, really good. Can't recommend enough. Please support him. And here, we'll go ahead and, oops, I'll go ahead and play this. Hopefully I'm at the beginning. Or not. Boo, 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 boo. Hello? Hello? Just checking, you know, what's happening. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, and
I'm Dr. Orion
There we
Teraband,
go.
and this is
there we go. Hey, got it. Go back here. Okay. Let him introduce himself. Please support the.
I'm Dr.
content creator.
Orion Teraband, and this is Psychacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is a PhD in men. Ladies, this is an episode for you. If you are single and you don't want to be, it is time to go back to school. Now, I don't mean enrolling in a graduate program. In most cases, that's actually not a very good idea. What I mean is that you might have to invest some time, energy, and money into learning about men, like how they operate and what makes them tick. Now, you might hear that and think, Orion, why should I have to do this? Like, do men make an effort to learn about women? And I would say, yeah, they fucking do. Obviously, not all men, but I guarantee you there is a non-insignificant portion of the male population who hold a PhD in women. There are men who have made it their second fucking job to try and figure out what women want, how they operate, and what makes them tick. And they do this not out of the goodness of their heart, but out of a self-interested motivation, namely the desire to get more of what they want from women. One class of men who do this, who make it their vocation to study and understand women, are known as pickup artists. Now, that term by itself already grosses some women out. Like, some women really don't like the idea of these men. But what is pickup artistry? Fundamentally, it is applied behavioral psychology. Men go out and over hundreds or thousands of iterations allow outcomes to teach them what words, what tones, what actions, what behaviors work in order to increase the likelihood that women will be interested in sleeping with them. And that ultimately is what tends to creep women out. The idea that these men are manipulating women into having sex. And that's probably true, at least to some extent. Like, some manipulation is definitely taking place. But what's the alternative? Women aren't handing out sex on the street corner. And female desire is much more reactive than male desire. Reactive in the sense that it responds to stimulation. A woman might feel spontaneous sexual attraction for, say, Henry Cavill, but if you're an average guy, probably not. So if you're an average guy and you want to have sex, you have to kind of go out and make it happen. And you do this successfully by learning what stimuli women actually respond to. Not what you think they should respond to, not what you want them to respond to, but what they actually respond to. And this takes practice. These guys take courses, spend thousands of dollars on coaching, change their appearance, and suffer an incredible amount of rejection. They read books and listen to podcasts and watch YouTube videos. They make it their job to learn how to get what they want from women. And on some level, regardless of how you feel about pickup artists, you gotta kind of respect that. Like, they definitely put in the time. And that's the other reason why women generally don't like pickup artistry. It works. Obviously not all the time, but game absolutely makes it much more likely that you will get laid as a man. If these things didn't work, I don't think that women would be so upset. They don't like the idea that men can learn to do things that will increase the chances that women will sleep with them, because it kind of makes them feel like suckers for falling for their tricks. But on some level, that's fair. Like, if you put in the time, energy, and expense, then you should see some positive results. And women might balk, well, why can't men put in the time, energy, and expense into giving us commitment and being loyal? And I would respond, because that's what you want. That's not what men want. If men are going to go through the trouble and expense, they're going to do so to get what they want. Make sense? If you appreciate the insights on this channel, I would highly encourage you to get your hands on a copy of my book, The Value of Others. Over the course of 432 pages, I delve deep into my economic model of relationships and explain the behavior of both men and women in the game of mating and dating. I also provide a lot of actionable advice on how to get and keep more of what you want in the sexual marketplace. Once you read The Value of Others, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. Now available in ebook, audiobook, and paperback formats. The links are in the description. Now, let's look at it from the other side. I don't know a single woman who has gotten a PhD in men. Indeed, the idea that women might have to learn some skills and acquire some knowledge and change their behavior in order to get what they want from men is ludicrous, if not offensive, to the majority of Western women. And to be fair, women probably don't have to earn a PhD in men, mostly because men are far less complicated than women are. Men are often oversimplified, like it actually takes more than sex and a sandwich to win us over, but they are far, far simpler than women. So women wouldn't need to devote several years of study to understand men, but they could get a certificate in men, like an associate's degree in men. That's reasonable. Like some period of dedicated study would probably be helpful, even if it's significantly shorter than men's equivalent course. And why is this study required? Because just like the pickup artists, women can learn what words, what tones, what actions, what behaviors work in order to increase the likelihood that men will be interested in giving them what they want. And just like pickup artistry, this will generally require at least some degree of manipulation. But what's the alternative? Men, at least the men that women wanted from, aren't handing out commitment on the street corner. A man might feel spontaneous desire to commit to a fabulously beautiful woman, but if you're an average woman, probably not. So if you're an average woman and you want to get commitment, you have to kind of go out and make it happen. And you do this successfully by learning what stimuli men actually respond to, not what you think they should respond to, not what you want them to respond to, but what they actually respond to. And unpopular truth, if you aren't willing to put in the effort to learn those things, then why should men give you what you want? That would be like a guy who won't make an effort to be attractive to women just expecting that he should get sex from them. I mean, that feels really creepy and entitled, right, ladies? Well, from our perspective, it also feels kind of creepy and entitled when you insist that you shouldn't have to make an effort to be attractive to men in order to get commitment from them. Just like men, some of you might need to invest some time, energy, and money into learning how to get what you want. And if you do, your success will be fair. Like if you put in the effort, then you should see some positive results. Because in the absence of this training, in the absence of evidence or outcomes or strategy or system, what are you left with? A bunch of bullshit cliches that aren't true. If it's meant to be, then it will be. As if you can just sit tight and wait for your meet cute. If he loved me, he would try harder. As if his level of effort has nothing to do with you. A real man knows the value of a woman and will treat her like a princess and put a ring on it. Like all those things have to do with men. Where do you factor into getting what you want? Wake up. It is your responsibility to get what you want. It is not men's responsibility to give you what you want. You are not entitled to a goddamn thing. No one is. Most men are not walking around thinking, wow, I sure hope I can find a woman today to protect and provision. It's extremely rare for a man to spontaneously desire to offer a woman a lifelong commitment. It's inside of most men, but you have to kind of bring it out of us. By the same token, most women aren't walking around thinking, wow, I sure hope I get absolutely ravished in a nasty, disrespectful way today. It's pretty rare for a woman to spontaneously offer that super freaky milk to a man. It's inside most of you, but we kind of have to bring it out of you. And those who learn how to do those things tend to get what they want. So if you're a woman and you're single and you don't want to be, then it might be time to do something that you haven't done before. Pick up a book, take a class, get some coaching, put your pride aside, and go out and get what you want. I know you can do it. What do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Let me know in the comments below. And please send this episode to someone who you think might benefit from its message, as it's word-of-mouth referrals like this that really help to make the channel grow. And anyone looking to join my free weekly newsletter or book a paid consultation can do so on my website. The links to everything are in the description below. As always, I appreciate your support, and thank you for listening.
Woo! Awesome. Awesome. Yep. Very, very true. We don't invest. If you don't invest in learning, yeah, it's just all the guy's fault for not giving you everything you wanted. Hey, the next video is the 3 requirements of a good relationship. Bye. Boop, 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 boom. 3 requirements of a good relationship. The School of Life. Okay. Hey, how did I not subscribe? What's going on? All right, here we go. Oops. Okay, no. And there we go.
Many people, after they've been in a couple for some time, will privately admit that they are, in many ways, frustrated and disappointed by the person they've chosen to share their lives with. If pressed for details, they will have no difficulty coming up with a list. Their partner, they might complain, is too loyal to their irritating family, or doesn't share their views on the layout of the living room, or never wants to go on camping holidays, or plays tennis every Wednesday evening no matter what, or doesn't like Moroccan food, or doesn't share their enthusiasm for 19th century Russian novels, or has a habit of adding actually to every second sentence when it's actually redundant. As the list gets longer, they sigh. They still love their partner and they long to be happy together. It's just that it seems impossibly complicated to make this relationship work. What's driving the frustration is not that they've sadly fallen for an idiot as a mate. It's rather that we have all inherited needlessly complicated ideas of what a relationship is supposed to be for. We are told that love is meant to involve the almost total merger of two lives. We expect that a loving couple must live in the same house, eat the same meals together every night, share the same bed, go to sleep and get up at the same time, only ever have sex with, or even sexual thoughts about each other, regularly see each other's families, have all their friends in common, and pretty much think the same thoughts on every topic at every moment. It's a beautiful vision, but a hellish one too, because it places an impossibly punitive burden of expectation on another human. We feel the partner must be right for us in every way, and if they're not, has to be prodded and cajoled into reform. But there is another perspective. Relationships don't have to be so complicated and ambitious if we keep in view what in the end actually makes them fulfilling. If we boil matters down, there might really just be three essential things that we want from a lover. Firstly, kindness. A partner who is gentle with our imperfections and can good-humouredly tolerate us as we are. Secondly, shared vulnerability. Someone with whom we can be open about our anxieties, worries, and the problems that throw us off balance. Someone we don't have to put on a good front for. Someone around whom we can be weak, vulnerable, and honest, and who will be the same around us. Thirdly, understanding. Someone who is interested in and can make sense of certain obscure features of our minds, our obsessions, preoccupations, and ways of seeing the world, and whom we are excited to understand in turn. If we have these three critical ingredients to hand, we will feel loved and essentially satisfied, whatever differences then crop up in 100 other areas. Perhaps our partner's friends or routines won't be a delight, but we will be content. Just as if we lack these emotional goods and yet agree on every detail of European literature, interior design, and social existence, we are still likely to feel lonely and bereft. By limiting what we expect a relationship to be about, we can overcome the tyranny and bad temper that bedevils so many lovers. A good, simpler, yet very fulfilling relationship could end up in a minimal state. We might not socialize much together. We might hardly ever encounter each other's families. Our finances might overlap only at a few points. We could be living in different places and only meet up twice a week. Conceivably, we might not even ask too many questions about each other's sex life. But when we would be together, it would be profoundly gratifying because we would be in the presence of someone who knew how to be kind, vulnerable, and understanding. A bond between two people can be very deep and important precisely because it's not played out across all practical details of existence. By simplifying and clarifying what a relationship is for, we release ourselves from overly complicated conflicts and can focus on our urgent underlying needs to be sympathized with, seen, and understood.
Deciding whether to stay in or leave a relationship is one of the trickiest and most consequential decisions we can face. Our stay or leave card game can help us towards an answer. Click now.
Yes, you can go to their YouTube channel and can check that out. Yeah, awesome. Requirements for a good relationship. All right. Now, let's see what we got going on. Diddly-doo. What we got happening there? Hey. So, what we're gonna do is yeah, we're gonna just kind of think we'll say goodnight, and we'll be back tomorrow with science truth here. Yeah, the 4 quadrants, a map of all knowledge and human experience by the living philosophy. Yeah, we'll be back for that. And we will see you loud. We will see you tomorrow.